Most people don't forget what they learned because they have a bad memory. They forget because they never truly learned it in the first place. Learning isn't about collecting information. It's about transforming knowledge into usable understanding. And here's what almost no one realizes. You don't retain what you merely read. You retain what you process. The human mind isn't a storage unit. It's a system of connections. The brain only keeps what turns into reasoning, action, or insight. That's why reading fast, watching videos at double speed, or writing everything down doesn't guarantee learning. The secret lies in what comes after. Between the moment you consume an idea and the moment it becomes part of who you are, there's a gap, and that's where real learning happens. The creator of this method calls it the balance between consumption and mental digestion. Consumption is when you absorb. Digestion is when you transform. One without the other is a waste of time. Most people live stuck in consumption, addicted to collecting content, but never creating an internal structure to retain it. The mind needs pauses, it needs synthesis, it needs application. Whatever you don't translate into action, your brain throws away as irrelevant. So the real question is, are you actually learning or just accumulating? The method you're about to discover, PACER, was designed precisely to solve this problem, to turn reading and studying into lasting retention, mental clarity, and real mastery. PACER is a mental map that transforms any information into permanent knowledge. It divides what you learn into 5 types of content, and each type requires a specific kind of processing. It's like having 5 doors in your mind, and each one opens with a different key. The first letter, P, stands for procedural, practical knowledge, the how to do it. It's learning that requires action, not reading. If you want to learn something skill-based, writing better, playing an instrument, speaking in public, the mind only records it when the body executes it. The command is simple. Learn by doing. Repeat, practice, make mistakes, adjust. The brain only marks something as important when there's movement and effort. The second letter, A, stands for analogous, knowledge through analogy. Here lies one of the most powerful mental tricks that exist. Every abstract idea needs a concrete image to last. The mind doesn't remember scattered phrases, it remembers vivid comparisons. So whenever you learn something new, create an analogy. Ask yourself, what does this resemble? Or what image represents this in my mind? When you build your own analogies, you force the brain to connect the new with the familiar, and that connection is where learning becomes permanent. The third letter, C, stands for conceptual, the concepts, principles, and relationships between ideas. This is the kind of knowledge that defines the depth of your understanding. Memorizing is easy. Comprehension is rare. To master concepts, reading isn't enough. You have to map them. Build mental networks between ideas. Visualize content as a map, not a list. When the brain understands how the parts connect, it never forgets the whole. The fourth letter, E, stands for evidence, the proof behind an idea. Numbers, examples, experiments, data, facts. This type of information requires organization and review. The most common mistake is underestimating the power of revisiting. The brain forgets by default. It's not designed to store everything. That's why you must teach it what to keep. The process is simple. Store your notes in an accessible way. Use digital notebooks, flashcards, Notion, any tool, and return to them periodically. Spaced repetition is like oxygen for memory. Reviewing tells the brain, this matters, keep it. The fifth letter is R, for reference, quick access knowledge. These are the details you don't need to keep constantly in your head, but must have within reach. Dates, names, formulas, quotes. The mind works best when you don't overload your internal storage. The secret is to externalize. Build systems to find, not to memorize. Use flashcards, smart notes, or short index cards with spaced review. The goal isn't to know everything. It's to know where to find everything when you need it. And this is where the Packer method comes full circle. It's not a reading technique. It's a system of digestion. It teaches that every type of information must be processed differently because the brain doesn't treat everything the same way. Practical knowledge needs repetition. Conceptual knowledge needs structure. Evidence needs review. And reference knowledge needs systems. That's what separates people who read a lot and forget from those who read little and never forget. Here's the secret. Learning isn't about memorizing words. It's about reconstructing the thinking behind them. Understanding is power. When you truly understand, you don't need to force memory. It becomes a natural consequence of clarity. Most people try to store sentences but forget to store meaning. And meaning is what the brain recognizes as truth. Want to remember forever? Then stop trying to remember. Try to understand. Ask yourself, why does this work? How can I apply this today? What changes if I alter this part? These questions create mental roots. They connect theory to experience. And that bridge is what makes the brain record information deeply. The mind doesn't learn through mechanical repetition. It learns through engagement. Every time you question, explain, and reconstruct knowledge in your own words, you're literally shaping new neural connections. That's why the biggest mistake is studying as a spectator. You must become a participant in knowledge. The brain is an active system, not a passive one. It needs to build, not just consume. So when you finish studying something, close the book and explain it, even if it's to an empty room. Say out loud what you just learned, as if teaching someone else. And notice, the simpler you can explain it, the deeper your understanding truly is. Real learning happens when you can turn something complex into something clear, fluid, and natural. That's mastery. The mind doesn't want to be full. It wants to be clear. Now think about this. What if learning were an experiment? Not something to memorize, but something to discover. The mind loves to test, to play, to fail, to adjust, to try again. That's how it locks things in. When you turn learning into a mental laboratory, boredom disappears. You begin to engage with the process, to feel genuine curiosity. Don't study just to get it right. Study to understand what happens when you get it wrong. Every mistake is valuable information, a map showing what's still missing. And the more you test, the more your brain understands the pattern. That's how insight is born, that moment when everything suddenly clicks. The brain operates through experimentation, not obedience. So stop trying to learn like a machine and start learning like an explorer. Ask what if, why, how. Write hypotheses, draw possibilities, imagine scenarios. When you do this, you activate the mind's creative power, the same one the great thinkers used to understand the universe. Learning stops being an obligation and becomes living curiosity. Here's the secret. You don't learn by repeating. You learn by recreating, by thinking, combining, altering, mixing ideas until knowledge becomes part of who you are. That's how you never forget, because what you create, the mind recognizes as yours. Everything in the universe is connected, and your mind learns through connection too. True learning happens when you see the bridges between ideas, when you realize that an economic principle can teach you something about human behavior, that a lesson in physics can explain life itself, that a concept in music can reveal how the brain creates harmony between reason and emotion. The mind doesn't work in isolated drawers. It functions like a living web. Every new piece of knowledge must link to something you already understand, and that link is what locks in learning. That's why mind maps work. They turn thought into visible structure, and the more connections you build, the stronger your memory network becomes. It's as if the brain says, "I've seen this before, but now I understand it from another angle." The secret isn't memorization, it's association. When reading something new, ask yourself, where does this fit into what I already know? And by answering, you turn information into wisdom. The mind loves patterns, and each time you find one, it builds a neural bridge. That's why some people learn with speed and depth. They don't collect data, they connect worlds. Learning isn't about stacking knowledge, it's about weaving meaning. The more connections you create, the more alive your intelligence becomes. There's a silent strength that separates great thinkers from the rest. The courage to say, "I don't know," Because only when you admit you don't know does your mind open to real learning. Pretending to know is like locking a door from the inside. Nothing new can enter. The mind that wants to appear smart is the same one that blocks its own growth. But the mind that embraces emptiness blooms. When you accept that you don't understand something, you awaken the most powerful engine of learning, curiosity. It's what drives the brain to seek connections, test ideas, and rebuild understanding. The curious mind isn't satisfied with ready-made answers. It wants to know why, and it's in that process that learning becomes permanent. Mistakes aren't enemies, they're laboratories. Every doubt is a new neural path waiting to be formed. That's why true learners aren't afraid to look foolish. They're only afraid to stop questioning. The more you allow yourself not to know, the more space you create to discover. The mind that wants to understand everything instantly becomes shallow. The one that embraces uncertainty becomes deep. To know little, but deeply, is worth more than knowing much and understanding nothing. When you take on the role of a lifelong learner, the entire world becomes your classroom, and the joy of discovering becomes the fuel of your mind. Now listen closely. Here's the secret that turns learning into permanence. If you want to remember everything you learn, it's not enough to absorb. You must rebuild. Knowledge is like a muscle. It grows when you make it move. So every time you learn something new, turn it into simple words, as if you were teaching someone who knows nothing about it. When you do this, you force your mind to reorganize what it understood, and that's when knowledge solidifies. There is no real memorization without explanation. The mind remembers most intensely what it has to recreate. That's why those who teach learn the most. When you explain, your mind forges new connections, transforms data into ideas, and ideas into understanding. And each time you repeat this process, the brain says, "This matters. Keep this with me." Conscious repetition is the cement of learning. But here's the crucial part. Don't repeat mechanically. Repeat with purpose. Relive the emotion of what you learned. Visualize it, connect it, question it, and above all, apply it. Knowledge that isn't used is knowledge that fades. You want to remember? Use what you've learned. Talk about it, write about it, test it in real life. The mind understands this. What you use, it keeps. What you ignore, it erases. Forgetting isn't failure, it's filtering. The brain is far too intelligent to store what you don't value. So show it what matters. Practice, share, connect. With each application, knowledge stops being mere information and becomes part of who you are. Now listen carefully, because this is where everything comes together. Learning isn't about accumulation, it's about transformation. True mastery begins when what you know starts changing how you live, when knowledge stops being something you carry and becomes something that guides you. Remember, the mind is fertile ground, but it only blooms when you nurture what you plant. Every idea you understand, every concept you apply, every repetition you do with intention is a seed being watered by awareness. And the result doesn't come by magic, it comes by consistency. The difference between those who forget and those who master is one simple decision: to keep practicing, even when it feels like you already know. Because real learning isn't linear, it's spiral. You return to the same point, but at a deeper level. So the next time you learn something, don't ask, "How can I memorize this?" Ask, "How can I live this?" Because what you live, you never forget. When knowledge becomes action, the brain recognizes it as part of your being. And that's how you remember everything. Not by force, but by identity. You become what you understand, and you understand what you practice. And if you ever doubt yourself, return to the essentials. Simplify, explain, question, apply. That's the cycle. That's the secret to remembering everything you read forever. If this video awakens something inside you, then now is the time to act. Write this in the comments. Today, I reprogram my mind to never forget what I learned. Write it as a command, as a mental affirmation. Because when you write, the brain recognizes it as a decision and begins to work in your favor. Leave your like right now, because that's how you tell YouTube you want more content that expands your awareness. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe now. Here, every video is another step in your awakening. Here, you'll learn to master your mind, remember everything you read, and turn knowledge into real power. Your new level of awareness begins now. About 1 in 9 people over the age of 65 will be diagnosed with some form of dementia, and that number jumps to nearly 1 in 3 after 85. And here's the shocking truth. It may seem like an inevitable fate, but it isn't. Research from leading neuroscience centers shows that people who keep their brains active can cut that risk by up to 50% in their likelihood of developing dementia. And now, listen carefully. When you stop learning, your brain begins a silent process of deterioration. Memory becomes fragile. Reasoning slows down. Creativity fades. You start to lose the very thing that makes you human, the ability to think freely, to question, to create. You probably know that our bodies need constant stimulation. When someone stops training their muscles, what happens? They shrink, they weaken, they become fragile. The brain is like an invisible muscle. When we stop reasoning, questioning, and learning, it begins to wither in silence. The connections that support memory, logic, and creativity start to break down. And this process gives no warning. One day you simply wake up and realize you're forgetting simple details. You no longer think as clearly. And the mental energy that once felt natural is gone. Hundreds of millions of people around the world already live this reality. Many don't realize that the root cause is not just age or cruel destiny, but the lack of constant mental stimulation. How many times have you heard someone say, "I got old and lost my memory"? What almost no one tells you is that memory loss doesn't come from age itself, but from stagnation. A person stops challenging themselves, stops studying, stops learning new things, and the mind shifts into survival mode. It stops growing because it sees no need. And when that happens, not only does memory weaken, but the entire body begins to respond with signs of decline. But don't worry, there is a solution. You can change everything starting today, if you're willing. Imagine being able to stop this process before it even begins. Imagine living your whole life with mental clarity, with the energy to learn something new every single day. It's not just about reading more books or memorizing information. It's about staying alive on the inside, about challenging your mind at every moment, like a scientist facing the unknown. And here's the key. Continuous learning is like oxygen that keeps this extraordinary machine running at peak performance. Without challenges, without new information, without curiosity, the brain suffocates. But when you feed it with study, with reasoning, with bold questions, something amazing happens. It builds new connections, strengthens memory, opens doors that once seemed closed. And this is not only for the young, not only for scholars, it's for everyone, at any age. Imagine living your entire life with mental clarity. This is not just about reading more books. It's about staying alive on the inside. It's about constantly challenging yourself, acting like a scientist before the unknown, and keeping the flame of curiosity alive. Because if you stop learning, your brain gets sick. Now that you understand the danger of letting your brain sit idle, the inevitable question arises. What can you do to keep it from wasting away? The answer is clear. You have to keep it moving. And I'm not just talking about crossword puzzles or memorizing numbers. I'm talking about a lifetime of challenges, of new experiences, of insatiable curiosity. Every time you learn something new, every time you push your mind to wrestle with a different concept, it responds by creating new connections, strengthening old ones, and opening pathways that didn't exist before. It's as if you were expanding an invisible map inside your head. Every new word, every idea, every calculation, every reflection is a brick added to that mental construction. And here's the secret. No matter your age, the brain can always be trained. Think with me. An older person who decides to learn a new language challenges their mind just like a young student would. They're not just memorizing words or phrases. They're expanding circuits, forcing the brain to build new connections, exercising memory, attention, and even creativity. Each word learned is like a weight lifted in the gym of the mind, and science has already shown this effort drastically reduces the chance of developing dementia. Now picture another scene. A man of the same age, but who decided to stop. He repeats the same routine every day, never reads anything new, never challenges himself to understand something different. His brain conserves energy, settles, begins to shut down connections that are no longer used. It's like a muscle that weakens until it has no strength left. In a short time, memory lapses appear, reasoning slows down, and what could have been prevented turns into destiny. That's why we can never stop. Studying, reading, talking with people who think differently, learning music, writing, daring to take on new intellectual challenges. All of this works like a vaccine for the brain. It's the invisible shield against forgetting. Now pay close attention to me because I have a challenge for you. I want you to pick, in your head, one number between 0 and 10. Got it? Now pick another number, between 11 and 20. Hold those two numbers firmly in your mind. Now, without paper, without a calculator, only with the power of your reasoning, multiply them together. Take a deep breath, think slowly, do the math in your head. It may seem simple, but this small exercise is already activating connections you often leave dormant. If you went with 8 and 19, may the universe help you. I sure won't.
And here's the most important part.
Write the result of that multiplication in the comments. Leave it there. That will show not only that you listened, but that you acted, that you're not just a spectator, but an active participant in strengthening your own mind. The more you exercise your mind, the more protected you become. And here's the point I want you to remember. It's not about age, it's about attitude. The brain of an older person who keeps learning stays younger than that of a younger adult who stopped challenging themselves. Whoever keeps curiosity alive, whoever never stops seeking knowledge, not only protects memory, but also gains vitality for an entire lifetime. Now listen carefully. You need a practical guide that will keep you disciplined even when motivation disappears. Because the truth is simple. Motivation is like the wind, it comes and goes. What sustains you is habit, routine, the conscious choice not to stop. Pay close attention now because I'm going to give you powerful techniques to train your mind every single day. First, choose something you enjoy, but that also demands effort. It could be learning a language, playing guitar, solving chess problems, writing stories, painting, or even studying mathematics. The secret is to unite pleasure and challenge. What entertains you keeps you consistent. What challenges you expands your mind. And once you've learned, start teaching. Yes, teaching. Because teaching is the key that accelerates learning, deepens understanding, and turns information into wisdom. When you explain something to another person, your brain has to organize ideas, simplify complex concepts, and find examples that make sense. This process not only locks memory in place, but multiplies the strength of neural connections. It's as if by teaching, you etched knowledge into a deeper layer of your mind.
And here's the most amazing part.
You don't need a classroom for this. You can teach your grandchildren, nieces, nephews, friends, anyone. You can even teach yourself. Yes, talk out loud in the car, in the bathroom, in front of the mirror. Imagine you're explaining to an invisible audience. Every time you put yourself in this role, your mind grows stronger. Science has already shown that the brain learns in stages. First, when you receive information, then when you practice. But the peak comes when you teach. That's when your mind realizes what it truly knows and what it still needs to learn. Now imagine the impact this could have on your life. You read a book and then explain it to someone. You learn a new word in another language and teach it to your grandchild. You study a complex idea and then summarize it out loud, as if you were giving a lecture. This habit turns knowledge into mastery. And here's the final key. Don't wait to become an expert to start teaching. Teach from the very beginning, even if it's only a little. Because every explanation is training. Every attempt to translate a concept is a victory of the brain over stagnation. A master is not someone who knows everything, but someone who never stops learning and sharing. Second technique, set small, consistent goals. Don't try to learn 100 words at once. Learn 5 words a day, but do it every day. The mind responds better to consistency than to bursts of effort. The brain loves rhythm. Train active memory. It's not enough to read or listen, you need to recall. Close the book and try to repeat what you read. Pause the video and explain to yourself what you just heard. It's in this effort to remember that memory strengthens. Create a fixed ritual. Just like you brush your teeth without thinking, make mental training a non-negotiable habit. It can be 20 minutes in the morning or half an hour before bed. What matters is that it's sacred, a promise you make to yourself.
Third technique.
Eliminate distractions, turn off notifications, create a quiet space. Your brain cannot grow if it's constantly being pulled away. Focus is the bridge between you and knowledge. Fourth technique. Mix pleasure with discipline. Read about topics you love, but once in a while choose something difficult. Learning only what you like won't expand the mind. Facing what makes you uncomfortable is what creates new connections. Fifth technique. Reward yourself. Every time you reach your goal, celebrate. A coffee, a walk, a break. The brain responds to reward and associates effort with pleasure. Imagine this. If you dedicate just 20 minutes a day to this process, in 1 year, you'll have invested more than 120 hours in training your mind. And that could be the difference between a brain that fades and a brain that keeps shining until the very last day of your life. Discipline is the key. Don't wait for motivation. Expect results. Every day you keep the habit alive, you are building an invisible fortress that protects your memory, your identity, and your freedom. So starting today, make it a ritual. Learn, explain, teach, even if it's just to yourself, because teaching is learning twice, and that's the path to keeping your mind alive, strong, and luminous until the final second of your life. Like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to keep your brain young and sharp, because here I'll show you how to never let your mind stop. Leave a comment telling me what you thought about this reflection. What struck you the most? What are you going to start applying from today on? Remember, every comment is one more step in this mental training. Because learning alone is powerful, but learning in community, sharing ideas, is even more transformative. So comment, like, subscribe, turn on the bell, and never let your brain stop. Pay close attention to me right now, because I'm about to reveal something you probably never stopped to think about. Your own brain is a liar. Yes, the most sophisticated machine in the universe, the one that carries all your knowledge and memories, has a dangerous trick. It makes you believe you've learned something, when in reality, you haven't learned anything at all. But relax. Don't go picking a fight with your husband or wife just because their brain is a liar too. That's a factory defect, not bad intentions. If it weren't, nobody would survive a family dinner. But now, let's get serious. Most of the time, you don't actually forget what you learned. The truth is, you never really understood it. It was your brain trying to trick you into giving up and going off to do something easier. And this is exactly where the secret lies. The brain prefers to save energy and stick to simpler things. So when you take a complex subject and simplify it, you're speaking the language it understands. It's like turning a scary monster into a child's toy. Suddenly, what seemed impossible becomes interesting, even fun, and accessible. The brain gets curious. It stops running away. Think about this. If you try to memorize the formula for gravity, you'll get lost in symbols. But if you translate it into something simple, gravity is the way the universe keeps things from flying off. Your mind opens up. Complexity becomes clarity.
The brain would rather have you put in as little effort as possible,
Make you think you've understood, and then push you to spend energy on immediate survival tasks. The problem is, in the modern world, this trap is deadly for anyone who truly wants to learn. Imagine this. You read a chapter in a book, close it, and think, okay, I got it. But the truth is you didn't. You just recognized the words. And the brain loves this trick. It confuses familiarity with understanding. It's like looking at an old photo. You recognize the image, but that doesn't mean you know the story behind it. Recognition is not knowledge. That's the first point I want you to take away. Don't trust that comfortable feeling of, I already understand. Whew. It's an illusion. Now think about this. If the brain loves the easy path, why try to learn in the hardest possible way? When you study a subject filled with jargon and complicated phrases, your brain quickly gives up. It hates meaningless effort. The secret is to simplify, to turn the complicated into simple, the obscure into clear, the heavy into light. When you simplify, you're not dumbing it down. You're making it accessible to your own thinking. It's like translating a foreign language into your native tongue. Suddenly, everything makes sense. But here's the problem. Schools and universities teach us the exact opposite. They throw formulas, dates, and ready-made definitions at us, expecting us to memorize and repeat. And memorization is the biggest mistake of all. The brain doesn't like memorizing. It likes understanding. When you try to just memorize, what happens? You forget. It's inevitable. The information walks in through the door, but it never finds a place to stay. You memorize it for the test, but after a few days, poof, it's gone. And this is where one of the greatest secrets comes in. If you want to truly learn, you need to teach. Teach even when you don't know it perfectly. Teach by talking to yourself, in the shower, in the car, in front of the mirror. Teach to a child, to a friend, even to someone imaginary. When you try to explain, the brain immediately notices the gaps, notices what's missing, and starts working to fill those holes. It's in this effort of turning the complex into the simple that real learning happens. The brain only learns when it's forced to organize, to connect, to transform. If you only read and repeat, it keeps lying to you, pretending you know. But when you explain, even imperfectly, you force your mind to build a solid structure. It's like laying the foundation of a house. Without it, everything collapses. Now imagine this. You spend hours reading, highlighting, repeating, and when it comes time to actually use what you studied, nothing. Empty. The mind feels like a drawer stuffed with loose papers. And do you know why? Because you're studying the wrong way. The brain doesn't learn from colorful highlights or the false sense that reviewing silently is enough. It learns when it is forced to build, to organize, to transform. And here lies the key to turning any subject into true knowledge. You must be able to explain it as if you were talking to a child. If you can't, it means you haven't understood it yet. And this is the moment when most people realize the big illusion. The mind loves to pretend it knows. It's satisfied with memorized phrases, but it can't recreate the reasoning behind them. The brain likes what's simple. It was built to look for shortcuts. But here's the secret. When you simplify something yourself, you're not just making it easier, you're forcing your mind to organize chaos, to translate confusion into clarity. That's real learning. Want an example? Think about quantum physics. Many people give up the moment they hear the name, because they imagine endless formulas and impossible equations. But what if I put it this way? Quantum physics studies the hidden rules that govern the invisible world of particles, which behave in strange, almost magical ways, but still follow their own laws. Suddenly, what seemed unreachable becomes an invitation to curiosity. Or take Einstein's relativity. It sounds impossible, but it's simple. Time is not the same for everyone. Whoever moves faster feels time passing more slowly. It's like being on a bus. To you sitting inside, the clock seems to tick normally, but to someone watching the bus go by, it looks different. That's all relativity is. Time and space change depending on speed. Now think about derivatives in math. Many people freeze when they see the symbols, but simplify it. A derivative is just asking, what's the speed right now? If a car is going 50 miles per hour, the derivative is telling you exactly that, the rate of change at that moment. And DNA? It sounds intimidating, like something only a mad scientist would understand. But in reality, it's just a recipe book inside your body. The letters are the ingredients, and each recipe produces a protein. And proteins are what build everything in you: skin, hair, muscles. Another example, the second law of thermodynamics. Complicated name, but it's really this simple. Everything tends to get messy on its own. A clean room will never magically get cleaner by itself. It always moves toward disorder. To bring order, you have to spend energy. Even complex numbers, which sound scary, are simple. They're just a way of dealing with problems that didn't have answers before, like the square root of a negative number. It's like inventing a new tool in math to solve problems nobody could solve before. Do you see it? What once seemed impossible becomes obvious once you simplify. The brain stops running away because now it understands the logic. The secret isn't memorizing. It's translating the strange into something you already know. And when you simplify and start using the technique of explaining out loud, something magical happens inside your brain. It's like it gets exposed. While you're reading silently, it can pretend it understands. But when you try to put it into words out loud, the lie shows up immediately. You forget. And that's wonderful, because now you know exactly where the gaps in your knowledge are. Picture this. You're in the car trying to explain to a friend how gravity works. If all you've memorized is the phrase, "Gravity is the force that pulls bodies toward the center of the earth," you'll stop there. But when you start to explain it out loud, you realize you don't know why it acts that way, or how it works on other planets. That discomfort is the sign your mind needs to really get to work. Do this all the time. Do it alone. Explain as if you were teaching it to children. And then you might ask me, but what if people call me crazy? Let me tell you something. If someone catches you talking to yourself in the shower about Einstein's theory of relativity, yeah, they might think it's odd. But you know what's even stranger? Studying for 10 years of your life and forgetting it all in 2 weeks. That's the real madness. If they call you crazy, thank them. Say, "Thank you, I'm practicing the same method that won Richard Feynman a Nobel Prize. And you, still repeating things like a parrot?" And flash that victorious smile. Think about it. Which would you rather be? The crazy one who really learns, or the normal one who memorizes today and forgets tomorrow? The person talking to themselves in the car about physics might look eccentric, but the person who never tries keeps falling for their brain's lies. And it doesn't matter if you explain it wrong, if you invent weird analogies, if your explanation sounds childish. That's the whole point. It's by trying to explain things simply, even in silly ways, that you discover whether you truly learned. If the explanation comes out clear, you've mastered it. If you get stuck, you go back, study again, simplify more, and try once more. That cycle is pure gold. Now think about how powerful this is. When you explain out loud, you're not just repeating, you're creating new connections in the brain. You're training your long-term memory, reinforcing neural pathways that won't fade away with time. It's the difference between writing something in the sand and carving it in stone.
Now type this in the comments. I won't let my brain fool me. When you write it, it's the beginning of reprogramming your mind. You're declaring that you refuse to be tricked by a lazy brain. From this simple act, you start awakening a new version of yourself, more focused, more disciplined, more unstoppable. Make this your first step toward achieving the impossible. Pay close attention now, because this part is decisive. You can simplify a subject. You can explain it out loud, even to your dog. But without effort and discipline, all of it dissolves into thin air. Knowledge has to be watered every day, like a plant that only grows when it's cared for. The problem is that the brain hates continuous effort. It loves immediate reward. That's why you can spend hours on social media but complain about 5 minutes of studying. But true knowledge doesn't come from ease. It's born out of discomfort. Think of a muscle. You don't get strong by lifting a weight once. You get strong by repeating, by feeling the pain, by pushing through the resistance. The brain works the same way. Every time you review, explain again, simplify again, you're lifting mental weights. It's tiring, but that's how the mind becomes sharp. Now imagine this. You simplify Einstein's theory of relativity. You explain it out loud. You spot the gaps. What should you do next? Go back. Read again. Think again. Speak again. That again is what shapes memory. Here's where effort comes in. It's not enough to understand once. You need to consolidate. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't have discipline, you'll never have consistency. And without consistency, there is no lasting learning. The brain needs spaced repetition, constant returns to the subject. It's like sharpening a blade. Each stroke removes an imperfection until the blade can cut through the impossible. Discipline isn't studying when you're motivated. Discipline is studying even when you don't feel like it, even when it's boring, even when the bed is calling your name. That's the moment when you stop being a prisoner of your lazy brain and become its master. So remember this, simplifying opens the door, Teaching out loud is stepping through it, but discipline is what keeps you on the other side. Now let me ask you a question. What makes someone get out of bed before the sun rises? What makes someone endure sleepless nights studying, practicing, failing, and trying again? It's not talent. It's not luck. It's desire. Desire is the invisible fuel that pushes you through any obstacle. If you want to be better, you first have to truly want it. Desire is not a superficial wish. It's when you feel you can't live without it. It's when studying stops being an obligation and becomes part of who you are. But desire needs direction. That's where willpower comes in. Desire is the spark. Willpower is the movement. It's saying, I won't wait for perfect conditions. I'll start now with what I have. Willpower doesn't ask for permission. It acts, even when you don't know the whole path. And above all, you need a purpose. Purpose is the compass. Without it, you run in circles. With it, even the heaviest effort gains meaning. Those who have purpose don't study just to pass a test. They study to transform themselves, to leave a mark, to serve something greater. Imagine this. Two people are carrying stones. One complains, says it's heavy, says it doesn't make sense. The other smiles because they know they're building a cathedral. The stone is the same, the effort is the same, but purpose changes everything. Do you want to become better? Then feed your desire every single day. Turn that desire into willpower, into practical action, and guide that willpower with a purpose so great that even the hardest days become part of your victory. Because in the end, knowledge isn't just about piling up information. It's about becoming someone capable of achieving the impossible. And only those with burning desire, steady will, and clear purpose ever get there. Now, to make a commitment to yourself, write this in the comments. From today on, I will study, simplify, and teach. That will be your public commitment to true learning. And if this video made sense to you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Remember this, true learning is not in what you read, but in what you can transform inside yourself. Knowledge doesn't change the world just by existing. It changes the world when it changes you. Successful people think differently because they're not worried about other people's judgment. While the world criticizes, they create. While most people are busy protecting their reputation, they're too busy searching for the truth. And here's the key. Thinking differently is not an aesthetic choice. It's an intellectual survival skill. If you think like everyone else, you'll end up with the same results as everyone else. And the average is harsh. Uninspiring jobs, lives with no purpose, routines where people wake up, work, complain, and go to sleep. Nothing more. Is that really living? Or is it just surviving? Pay close attention now, because this may change the course of your life. Think differently or die average. Stop believing what everyone else believes. Stop repeating what everyone else says. Every success story begins with someone who dared to disagree with normality. Not because they wanted to look rebellious, but because curiosity was stronger than the fear of judgment. And it's this curiosity, directed and disciplined, that opens doors the average will never see. So think differently. And if you decide to think differently, prepare yourself for something greater. The freedom to learn anything, to create paths no one has created, to master your own mind. Listen carefully now, because what I'm about to reveal lies behind every genius mind: curiosity. Ordinary people lose curiosity over time. They accept ready-made answers, stop asking questions, stop investigating. They think they already know enough. And that's the moment mediocrity sets in. Now look at the people who truly stood out. Scientists, entrepreneurs, creative leaders. They all had one thing in common. They never stopped asking questions. Even if they didn't understand something, they would ask again and again and again until the answer finally made sense in their mind. This is the first step to thinking differently.
Many people are embarrassed to raise their hand and say, "I don't understand," afraid of being criticized. In a classroom, the student who asks too many questions is easily labeled as stupid. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The one who asks questions is one step ahead. The one who questions shows the courage to learn. That's why, if you want to start thinking differently, begin with the simple act of admitting your doubt. The courage to ask is the mark of someone who refuses to remain ordinary. Now pay attention to me because I'll show you how to truly think differently. Thinking differently is a daily exercise in intellectual freedom. The first step is to do what you love. When you work or study something that sparks passion, your energy multiplies. Normal is waking up tired because you spend energy on activities that don't inspire you. Different is waking up hungry for life because you're investing your time in what makes sense. Ask yourself, if nobody judged me, what would I choose to learn, to create, or to build? That answer points to your true path. Second, protect your mental independence. That means not letting other people's opinions become the filter for what you think or do. Most people fear being criticized, fear being called strange. But remember, everyone who changed the world was ridiculed before they were applauded. Thinking differently always bothers people because it exposes the mediocrity of those who follow the herd. Third, feed your curiosity without fear. Ask, test, explore. That's the fuel of innovation. Don't accept anything just because everyone does it this way. Ask yourself, is there another way? The simple act of questioning already puts you on another level. Fourth, simplify your life to free up energy for the essential. Those who think like everyone else get lost in excess. Those who think differently focus on what matters. If you're exhausted, it's hard to have the clarity to think in a new way. Energy is born from being aligned with purpose, eliminating the unnecessary, and putting strength into what truly moves your life. Pay close attention now, because what I'm about to tell you is one of the mind's biggest prisons, the fear of being different. Most people don't live their own ideas. They live other people's ideas. They're shaped by the opinions of family, friends, society, the media. They spend life trying to please, to fit in, to be accepted. But those who think differently understand something simple. If you always seek approval, you'll never have clarity. To think differently, you must learn to shield your mind against the pressure of the majority. And that starts with a daily exercise. Every time you feel tempted to do something just because everyone does it, stop and ask, does this really make sense to me? Does it bring me closer to what I want? Or does it just make me like everyone else? That simple question is enough to expose the automatic choices that keep you stuck in the average. Remember, life is too short to live dependent on other people's approval. Another point, choose carefully the voices you listen to. I'm not saying ignore everything and everyone, but be discerning. Ask yourself, does this person have results I admire? Do they live what they preach? Or do they just repeat what they've heard? If not, why give their opinion so much weight? Learn to separate constructive criticism from noise. And here's a powerful detail. The courage to stand by your own vision earns respect, even from those who disagree. At first, you may be criticized. You may even be ridiculed. But over time, when results appear, the same people who laughed at you go quiet. Nothing is more convincing than the evidence of a life lived with purpose and authenticity. Thinking differently is swimming against the current. It's bearing the pressure of judgment without giving in. It's choosing the clarity of your conscience over the empty applause of the crowd. And when you train yourself in this, you realize that freedom isn't being accepted. It's living true to what you believe, even if no one claps. Thinking differently isn't an inborn talent. It's a trained habit. You're not born outside the box. You build the box and then learn to break it every day. That takes discipline, and discipline is born from rituals. If you want to stand out, you need to turn curiosity and mental independence into concrete actions that shape how you think. The first ritual is the daily question. Pick any situation in your life and ask, why is this done this way? Don't accept the first answer. Go deeper. Who said it has to be like this? Is there a better, simpler, faster way to do it? When repeated every day, this exercise trains your mind not to settle for ready-made answers. The second ritual is explaining out loud. When you learn something new, don't keep it to yourself. Explain it. Even if it's to the mirror. When you speak, your mind organizes, your ideas align, and the gaps show up. That's the moment you discover if you truly understood. This simple habit will accelerate your ability to learn 10 times more than someone who only reads and repeats. The third ritual is creative review. At the end of the day, take one idea or important concept you learned and recreate it in your own words. Use a metaphor, a story, an example from your life. This act of recreation makes the idea stop being external and become part of you. It's in this act that different thinking begins to flourish. And finally, the ritual of conscious observation. Set aside a few minutes to observe something ordinary and ask yourself, what is no one else seeing here? It could be an object, a situation, even a conversation. This practice trains your eyes to see beyond the obvious. That's how innovations are born, from someone who looked at the ordinary and saw the extraordinary. Those who practice these rituals don't just think differently, they begin to live on another level of perception. And that difference builds up day after day until it becomes an advantage impossible to ignore. But here's the truth. The path of those who think differently is never easy. They are misunderstood, judged, often humiliated. The crowd cannot stand those who break the pattern, because independent thinking exposes the mediocrity of those who prefer to follow the herd. It's easier to call someone crazy than to admit they might have seen something you didn't. But listen, every great person you admire went through this. Galileo was condemned for seeing beyond what the church accepted. Bruce Lee was ridiculed for mixing styles and creating his own philosophy. All of them were seen as too different until the world had to bow to the evidence of what they built. And here's the secret few have the courage to accept. Thinking differently is expensive in the beginning, but it pays dividends forever. The rejection you feel today is the same energy that will fuel your victory tomorrow. This is the path of those who refuse to die average. They choose truth over acceptance, curiosity over indifference, courage over fear. And with that, they build something that lasts, something that inspires, something that cannot be erased. So I tell you, if you want to think differently, be prepared to be misunderstood, be ready to be criticized, but also be certain that in the end you will be remembered. Because no one remembers the crowd that merely repeated. History remembers the names of those who dared to be unique. Think differently, protect your flame, and never bow to mediocrity. Because in the end, you either have the courage to live as an exception, or you accept dying as just another in the average. Now it's on you. I want you to prove to yourself that you've chosen to think differently. Write in the comments, I will never accept dying being influenced. This phrase is more than words. It's a pact with your mind, a declaration that you will not bow to mediocrity. And if you enjoyed this lesson, leave your like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because here you'll keep receiving ideas that will challenge your mind, expand your vision, and accelerate your learning. Remember, those who think like the majority live like the majority, but those who choose to think differently create.
Time doesn't exist, at least not the way you think it does. Not as this universal clock ticking the same for everyone. That's an illusion. And once you understand why, you'll never look at your watch the same way again. Every clock on earth is lying to you. The one on your wall, the one on your wrist. And I don't mean they're broken or poorly calibrated. I mean something much more disturbing. There is no such thing as the correct time. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, that's ridiculous. We all agree what time it is. Noon is noon. Midnight is midnight. We synchronize our clocks and they all say the same thing. And yeah, sure, for everyday life, that works well enough. But here's the thing. It only works because we're all moving slowly. Very, very slowly compared to light. And we're all sitting in roughly the same gravitational field. The moment you change either of those conditions, your clock starts lying to you. Or more accurately, you realize it was never telling you the time. It was only telling you its time. Here's the secret. Time is personal. Time is local. Your clock measures your time. My clock measures my time. And these two times are not necessarily the same. So, let me explain what I mean by that. Because this isn't philosophy. This isn't some abstract idea you can argue about. This is measured. This is tested. This is real. Imagine you have two identical clocks. Perfect clocks. The best clocks anyone could ever build. You synchronize them perfectly. They tick together. They agree completely. Now you take one of those clocks and you put it on an airplane. You fly it around the world. And then you bring it back and compare it to the clock that stayed on the ground. They don't agree anymore. The clock that flew is behind. It's ticked fewer times. It's measured less time. And this isn't because the airplane vibrations messed it up, or because the pressure was different, or any mechanical explanation like that. No. Time itself passed more slowly for the moving clock. Now watch. This was actually done. In 1971, scientists put atomic clocks on airplanes, flew them around the world in both directions, and compared them to clocks on the ground. The results matched the predictions exactly. Time runs differently depending on how you're moving. But wait, there's more. It's not just motion that affects time. Gravity does too. A clock at the top of a tall building runs faster than a clock at the bottom. Not by much. We're talking billionths of a second. But it's real. It's measurable. The clock closer to the Earth, deeper in the gravitational field, ticks slower. So what does this mean? It means time isn't this universal thing flowing at the same rate everywhere. Time is flexible. Time is stretchable. Time is, well, personal. And this leads to something even stranger. The concept of now itself becomes meaningless. The twist, think about it. When you say right now, you're assuming there's some universal moment that applies everywhere. That right now, as you're listening to this, there's also a right now on Mars, a right now in the Andromeda galaxy, a simultaneous moment across the entire universe. If you're standing still on Earth, you have one definition of now. If you're flying past Earth at high speed, you have a different definition. Events that are simultaneous for you are not simultaneous for the moving person. And neither of you is more right than the other. This is hard to accept, I know. We grew up thinking of time as this absolute thing, this river flowing at the same rate everywhere, this background against which events happen. But nature doesn't care about what we grew up thinking. Nature does what nature does. And what nature does is far stranger than our intuitions. Here's why this matters. For most of human history, we thought space and time were completely separate things. Space was the stage. Time was the clock on the wall. They had nothing to do with each other. Then along came relativity and showed us that's completely wrong. Space and time are not separate. They're woven together into a single fabric. We call it space-time. And everything that happens in the universe happens in space-time. You cannot talk about where something is without also talking about when it is. They're part of the same measurement, part of the same reality. So let me give you an analogy. Imagine you're looking at a map. On this map, there's north-south and there's east-west, two different directions, perpendicular to each other. Now imagine two people standing in the same spot, but facing different directions. One person faces exactly north. For him, north and east are clearly different directions, no confusion. But then the other person faces northeast. For him, what he calls forward is partly north and partly east. His forward is a mixture of the first person's north and east. Neither person is wrong, they're just using different reference frames. What's purely north to one person is partly forward and partly sideways to another. Space and time work the same way. What looks like pure time to someone standing still looks like a mixture of time and space to someone moving. They're not separate things. They're different directions in space-time. And how you divide them up depends on your motion. That's the key. When you move through space, you're also affecting how you move through time. There's a trade-off. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. And this isn't a metaphor. This is literally what happens. Everything moves through space-time at the same total speed. Always. You can't avoid it. When you're sitting still, not moving through space at all of your motion through space-time is directed through time. Time flows at its maximum rate for you. But when you start moving through space, some of your space-time motion gets redirected. Less of it goes through time. So time slows down for you compared to someone who's standing still. Now you might ask, okay, but if time slows down when I move, why don't I notice it? And that's a great question. The answer is because everything slows down together. Your clock slows down. Your heartbeat slows down. Your thoughts slow down. Every process that could possibly measure time slows down by exactly the same amount. So from your perspective, everything feels normal. It's only when you compare your experience to someone else's, someone who is moving differently, that the difference shows up. Your clock and their clock no longer agree. Your time and their time have diverged. And here's the shock. This isn't a small effect at high speeds. If you could travel at 99% the speed of light, time would slow down by a factor of about 7. 1 year for you would be 7 years for people back on Earth. Get even closer to light speed, 99.9%, and the factor becomes about 22. You could take a trip for a few years, come back, and centuries could have passed on Earth. You could outlive everyone you know. You could see the far future, not by living longer, but by having time pass more slowly for you while the rest of the universe ages. This is real. This is how the universe works. Time is not what you thought it was. Well, nature doesn't think in terms of space and time separately. Nature thinks in terms of space-time. And once you start thinking that way too, everything starts to make sense. Imagine you're driving your car on a road. The road goes north. You can measure how far north you've gone. Simple enough. But now the road curves. It starts going a little bit east as well as north. Now, for every mile you drive, you're not going a full mile north anymore. Some of your motion is being spent going east. The total distance you travel along the road stays the same. But how that distance gets divided between north and east, that changes depending on the direction of the road. Here's the truth. Space-time works exactly like this. There's a kind of distance in space-time, and everything travels through space-time. But how that travel gets divided between space and time depends on your motion. When you sit still, all your travel through space-time goes through time. You're not moving through space, so you move through time at the maximum rate. When you start moving through space, some of your space-time travel gets redirected into space. Less of it goes through time, so you age slower. Your clocks tick slower. Time dilates. It's not magic, it's geometry. It's the geometry of space-time. Now, this might sound abstract, so let me make it more concrete. There's a quantity in space-time that everyone agrees on. No matter how fast you're moving, no matter where you are, this quantity is the same. We call it the space-time interval. Think of it this way. In regular space, if I measure the distance between 2 points, I might get a different answer than you if we're using different coordinate systems. Maybe I'm measuring in one direction and you're measuring in another. We disagree about how far east something is or how far north. But the actual distance between the points, the straight line distance, that's the same for everyone. It doesn't matter how you orient your rulers. The distance is the distance. The key insight, space-time has something similar. There's an interval between two events, not just 2 points in space, but 2 events in space-time, meaning 2 locations that also have times attached to them. This interval combines both the spatial separation and the time separation. And just like the distance in regular space, this interval is the same for everyone. You might disagree about how much of it is space and how much is time, but the total interval, that's invariant. That's a fact of nature that doesn't change based on your perspective. So, when we say space and time are the same thing, we don't mean they're identical. Obviously, time feels different from space. You can walk backwards in space, but you can't walk backwards in time. There are differences. What we mean is that they're connected. They're part of the same geometric structure. You can trade one for the other, depending on how you're moving. But the underlying structure, the space-time itself, that's absolute. That's real. That's what nature actually cares about. But wait, we've been talking about motion. But what about gravity? How does gravity fit into all this? And this is where things get really interesting. See, for a long time, people thought of gravity as a force. You know, the Earth pulls on you, you pull on the Earth. There's this invisible rope connecting everything with mass. And for most purposes, that works fine. You can calculate orbits, predict falling objects, send rockets to the moon. But that picture is incomplete. It doesn't explain why gravity affects time. It doesn't explain why clocks at different heights run at different rates. Something deeper is going on. Here's what's really happening. Mass curves space-time. The Earth doesn't reach out and grab you with some invisible force. Instead, the Earth bends the space-time around it. And you, moving through that curved space-time, follow the natural path, which happens to curve toward the Earth. You feel this as falling. But really, you're just moving in a straight line through curved space-time. It's the space-time itself that's bent. And here's the beautiful part. Because space-time includes time, when space-time is curved, time is curved too. Near a massive object where space-time is more curved, time runs slower. Not because some force is acting on your clocks, but because the very fabric of time is stretched. Really think about that for a moment. Time isn't just affected by gravity. Time is part of what gravity bends. You know, people often think of curved space and have trouble visualizing it. What does it mean for space to be curved? Curved into what? But actually, that's the wrong question. Space doesn't have to be curved into anything. The curvature is intrinsic. It's a property of the space itself. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're an ant living on the surface of a balloon. You can only move on the surface. You can't go up or down. You can only crawl along the balloon's skin. For you, the balloon's surface is the entire universe. It's two-dimensional, but it's curved. If you walk in what feels like a straight line, you'll eventually come back to where you started. The surface wraps around. Now, we standing outside can see that the balloon is curved in three-dimensional space. But you, the ant, can figure out the surface is curved without ever leaving it. You can do experiments. You can measure angles of triangles. You can notice that the rules of flat geometry don't quite work. The surface itself has curvature, and you can detect it from the inside. Now watch this. Our space-time is the same way. It's curved. We don't need to ask, curved into what? Because the curvature is detectable from within space-time itself. We measure it by watching how clocks run at different rates, how light bends near massive objects, how objects accelerate toward each other without any force pushing them. This isn't philosophy. This is physics. This is measurable. And here's where time comes back in. The curvature of space-time near Earth is mostly curvature of time, not space. Space itself is barely curved at all near Earth. But time is significantly curved. That's why clocks at different heights tick at different rates. That's why falling objects accelerate. The time curvature is the dominant effect. So, when you drop a ball and watch it fall, what's really happening? The ball is moving through curved space-time. It's following the straightest possible path, what we call a geodesic, through that curved geometry. And because time runs slower closer to the Earth, that path curves downward. You think gravity is pulling the ball, but actually, the ball is just moving naturally through curved space-time. There's no force, just geometry. The twist here, this explains something that puzzled physicists for centuries. Why does gravity affect all objects the same way? A feather and a hammer in a vacuum fall at exactly the same rate. Why? If gravity were a force, you'd expect heavier things to feel a stronger pull. But they also have more inertia, more resistance to acceleration. These two effects exactly cancel. It seems like a coincidence, a very precise, very suspicious coincidence. But in the space-time picture, it's not a coincidence at all. Objects aren't being pulled. They're just moving through curved space-time. And the path through curved space-time doesn't depend on what the object is made of or how heavy it is. The geometry is the geometry. Everything follows the same curves. This is profound. Gravity isn't a force. Gravity is the shape of space-time. And time is part of that shape. So when I say time doesn't exist, what I mean is that time as this separate, independent, universal thing doesn't exist. Time as a river flowing at the same rate everywhere doesn't exist. That's an illusion created by our slow speeds and weak gravitational fields. What exists is space-time, this unified four-dimensional fabric that can be curved, stretched, and warped by the presence of mass and energy. Time is woven into this fabric, inseparable from space, relative to motion, affected by gravity. Your clock doesn't measure the time. Your clock measures its own journey through space-time. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's the truth. But if time is so flexible, if it's different for different observers, what's actually real? Is anything real? Or is everything just perspective? And this is where it gets beautiful. Because yes, some things are real. Absolutely, unchangeably, observer independently real. They're just not what you expected. The space-time interval between two events, that's real. Everyone agrees on it. The laws of physics themselves, those are real. They work the same way for everyone, no matter how fast they're moving. The speed of light, that's real. It's the same in all directions, for all observers, always. Here's the secret. What's relative is how you slice up space-time into space and time. That's a choice. That depends on your motion. But the space-time itself, the underlying four-dimensional geometry, that's absolute. It's like, imagine a loaf of bread. You can slice it straight across, or you can slice it at an angle. Different slices, different shapes. But the loaf itself doesn't change. The bread is the bread. Space-time is the loaf. Your now, your simultaneous moment across the universe, that's just one slice. Someone moving differently makes a different slice. But the loaf itself, the totality of all events in space-time, that's the same for everyone. So reality exists. It's just more subtle than we thought, more geometric, more unified. And now comes the shock. This picture of space-time, this four-dimensional block of reality, it has a disturbing implication. If the past and future are just different regions of space-time, and space-time is real, then in some sense, the past and future are just as real as the present. Think about it. The year 1800 exists in space-time. So does the year 3000. They're not gone or not yet happened. They're just in different locations in the four-dimensional structure. Your experience of now, moving forward through time, that's something happening within space-time, not something happening to space-time. Physicists call this the block universe view. All of time exists simultaneously, laid out like a landscape. We experience moving through it, moment by moment, but the landscape itself just is. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely true. There are debates about this. Philosophers argue, physicists argue. It's not settled. But what is settled is that our naive view of time is wrong. The common sense idea that the present is special, that the past is gone, that the future doesn't exist yet, this view is incompatible with what we know about space-time. Something stranger is going on. We just don't fully understand what. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about something practical, something that shows this isn't just abstract philosophy. You've probably heard of those incredibly precise clocks, atomic clocks. They use the vibrations of atoms to keep time. They're so accurate that they would only lose or gain 1 second over millions of years. These clocks are sensitive enough to detect the time dilation from gravity, even just from being a few feet higher or lower. Scientists have measured this. A clock on a table runs at a slightly different rate than a clock on the floor. The difference is tiny, fractions of a billionth of a second, but it's there. So, what does this mean for your life? Well, technically, your head is aging faster than your feet, because your head is farther from the center of the Earth in a slightly weaker gravitational field. Time runs slightly faster there. Don't worry, The difference over an entire lifetime is about a billionth of a second. You won't notice, but it's real. Your head and your feet are in slightly different time zones. And it gets weirder. The atomic clocks used for navigation, these systems need to account for both effects. The clocks are moving fast, which slows time down, but they're also higher up, which speeds time up. The two effects work in opposite directions, and the engineers had to calculate both precisely to make the system work. If they ignored relativity, if they assumed time was absolute and universal, the system would fail within hours. Errors would accumulate. The whole thing would be useless. So this isn't abstract. This is engineering. This is practical. Relativity isn't just a theory. It's a fact that we rely on every day. The truth is, we live in a relativistic universe. We always have. We just never noticed because we move slowly and live in weak gravity. Our intuitions evolved for the African savanna, not for high-speed travel or black holes. But now we know better. We've done the experiments, we've made the measurements, and the universe has told us in no uncertain terms that time is not what we thought. Now let me leave you with something to think about. We started by saying your clock is lying to you, and in a sense that's true. Your clock tells you its own personal time, not some universal time. It measures its own journey through space-time. But in another sense, maybe your clock is the only one telling the truth. It's telling you your time, the time you experience, the time that matters to your life, your aging, your existence. There's no cosmic clock in the sky keeping the real time. There's no universal present moment spreading across the cosmos. There's just space-time, and each of us traces our own path through it. When you really think about this, it's humbling. We walk around thinking we understand reality. We think time flows like a river, and space sits there empty and passive. We think our experience is how things actually are. But nature doesn't care about our expectations. Nature is deeper than we imagined, more connected, more geometric, more strange. And the beautiful part? We figured this out. Humans, on this tiny planet, orbiting an ordinary star, in one galaxy among billions. We looked carefully at nature, did experiments, followed the logic, and discovered that space and time are woven together, that gravity bends space-time, that the universe is far more elegant and far weirder than anyone expected. That's the power of physics, not just collecting facts, but finding the hidden structure underneath, the simple principles that explain complicated phenomena, the deep truths that were always there, waiting to be discovered. Time doesn't exist the way you thought, but what does exist is more beautiful, more subtle, and more connected than anything we could have imagined. And we're still learning. We still don't have all the answers. Space-time near black holes, at the very beginning of the universe, at the smallest scales, there's still mystery there, still questions, still discoveries waiting to be made. That's what makes this exciting. That's what makes physics worth doing. We've learned so much, and there's still so much more to learn. So keep asking questions, keep being curious, keep looking at the world and wondering what's really going on. Because when you do that, when you refuse to accept easy answers and dig for the truth, you become part of this incredible tradition, this human tradition of figuring out the universe, piece by piece, experiment by experiment, insight by insight. And who knows, maybe the next breakthrough will come from someone just like you.
The mind only obeys when it sees that you take action. Words without action are nothing but empty promises. But when you act, even in the smallest way, you confirm to yourself, I'm in charge. And here's the secret. It's about keeping small commitments. Think of someone who decides to save $5 a day and actually does it. It doesn't matter that it's a small amount. What matters is that it was done. In that moment, the mind records, he follows through on what he says. That's when inner confidence begins to grow, and the mind starts to obey. The mind is like a soldier. It needs clear orders and proof that you are the leader. When you procrastinate, the mind takes command. But when you act and follow through on your goals, no matter how small, you reclaim leadership. That's why one of the secrets that separates winners from everyone else is this. Never break the promise you make to yourself. If you say you'll wake up early, wake up. If you say you'll study, study. If you say you'll train, train. Every time you follow through, no matter the size, you strengthen the pact with yourself. And here's the magic. When you start acting in alignment with what you project, the external world responds. You begin to see opportunities you couldn't see before. You attract people who vibrate at the same frequency. You feel within yourself an energy that seemed asleep. This isn't luck. It's the natural consequence of alignment between mind and action. So starting today, choose one small daily action that represents the life you want to live. Want discipline? Make your bed every morning. Want abundance? Save and invest something daily, even if it's small. Want mental strength? Read for 10 minutes even when you don't feel like it. These simple acts build the fortress. But don't fall into the trap. The mind deceives you with excuses. It says, I'll start tomorrow. I can't today. It doesn't matter if I skip just once. But here's the key. Every time you give in to that voice, you train your mind to be undisciplined. Every time you conquer that voice, you train your mind to be indestructible. So answer me honestly. Are you willing to give orders to your mind and back them with actions? Because if you are, nothing can stop you. Your inner state reflects the outer world. Whoever controls their mind controls their world. Everything you see and touch is born first in the invisible space of your mind. If your mind is chaotic, your life will be chaotic. But if your mind is disciplined, your life becomes a masterpiece. Since childhood, you've been taught to memorize, to obey, but not to truly think. The system shaped your mind to be a servant of circumstances, not the master of your destiny. That's the poison. You don't realize you're living on autopilot. But there is a way to break this prison. There is a forbidden secret, hidden not because it's too hard to understand, but because it's so simple that most people never take it seriously. Your brain, like any part of your body, is a muscle, and every time you choose to exercise it through learning, you make it stronger. Imagine something with me that could flip your switch forever. What if every thought was like a wild horse? It runs fast, full of power, but completely without direction, completely out of control. Most people jump on this horse without a saddle, without reins, and end up being dragged by their own mind to places they never wanted to go. That's why they live tired, anxious, and full of regrets. But the forbidden secret that few dare to apply is this: you are not the horse, you are the rider. If you learn how to put reins on your mind, you can take it anywhere you want. Wealth, peace, success, freedom. Controlling the mind does not mean fighting against negative thoughts. That only makes them stronger. It means choosing which horse you ride. And here's the detail that separates ordinary people from extraordinary ones. Ordinary people feed any idea that shows up. Extraordinary people feed only the ones that push them forward. So from today on, start replacing negative thoughts. Instead of thinking this will go wrong, ask yourself, does this thought bring me closer to what I want or further away? If it pushes you away, leave it in the field. If it brings you closer, mount it and ride it to the end. This simple decision, repeated daily, is the difference between a life of mental slavery and a life of achievement. Feed your mind every day with words of power. Start right now by writing in the comments, I control my mind. Give your brain a direct command, a signal that from today you take the reins. The more you affirm, the more your mind believes. And the more it believes, the more your life changes. Every time you conquer your mind in small moments, when you choose to focus on studying, when you resist procrastination, when you don't let fear take over, you are training for the big battles. Whoever conquers themselves in the small things can conquer anything in the world. Pay close attention to me now, because this can change everything. The mind obeys only one law: focus. Wherever you place your attention consistently, energy accumulates. If you place it on fear, you create a future of limitations. If you place it on disciplined desire, you create a future of achievements. So starting today, choose one central idea that represents what you want to achieve: money, freedom, discipline. And every single day, feed that idea with images, words, and actions. Imagine what it would be like to live it. Speak it out loud as if it were already true.
Take one small practical step that confirms it in the physical world. This repetition isn't just mental. It's a command for your brain to understand that this is the inevitable path. When you repeat a thought with emotion, it becomes identity. It's no longer, I want to be disciplined. It's, I am disciplined. You don't need permission or luck or miracles. You only need to discipline your mind to project clearly what you want. And when that becomes a habit, everything around you begins to reorganize to make real what you have already built inside. Now stop and reflect with me. What good is controlling the mind if you don't direct it to create? The mind is like a projector. Everything you feed inside it will, sooner or later, materialize outside. And here's the secret. You're already creating your life. It's just that maybe you're creating what you don't want. Because every repeated thought, every emotion you feed, is like a brick placed in the building of your reality. Those who are organized inside themselves inevitably create opportunities around them. So turn discipline into pleasure. Success, in truth, is the journey itself, not merely its end. Most people view discipline as pain. But the greats, the ones who achieve everything, learn to take pleasure in every small victory over themselves. When they resist temptation, they celebrate. When they hit a tiny goal, they rejoice. They understood that real pleasure isn't in immediate indulgence, but in the power of looking at yourself and saying, I am in command. Imagine what it would be like to live this way. Every time your mind whispers, you can't, you smile and answer, I'll prove you wrong. Every time laziness shows up, you turn it into training. Every time fear tries to paralyze you, you convert it into fuel to move forward. That's the secret game that turns ordinary people into unstoppable forces. And here's something I want you to remember. It's not about eliminating negative thoughts. It's about transforming them into energy to act. Fear can become courage. Anxiety can become focus. Laziness can become strength. It all depends on how you command them. The forbidden secret is not about silencing the mind. It's about stepping into the role of its leader. Now answer me. Have you been commanding your mind, or has it been commanding you? Those who don't command their own minds are controlled by them. Such people live like prisoners. They are led by impulses, puppets of thoughts that appear out of nowhere. The mind says, don't do it now, leave it for later. And they give in. The mind whispers, you're not good enough. And the person believes it, quitting before they start. The mind fires off, it'll fail, you'll make a fool of yourself. And so grand dreams are buried before they even leave the cradle. Those who are commanded by the mind are in reality commanded by fear. These people live exhausted because their minds never shut up. They chase everything and arrive nowhere. An untrained mind is like a dog loose in a marketplace. It chases every scent and every sound with no focus, no direction. At the end of the day, it's tired, and it is won nothing. And do you know the hardest part? A mind without a leader convinces the person that this is normal. It manufactures justifications, invents excuses, builds narratives so that the prison feels comfortable. It's the voice that says, everyone lives like this. It's no use trying. You weren't born for great things. This is the silent tyranny of a mind without an owner. Now stop and reflect. How many opportunities have you already lost because you believed a sabotaging thought? How many days have you wasted because your own mind convinced you it was better not to act? Those who are commanded by their minds don't truly live. They merely survive, obeying invisible orders. But the good news is, this can change the exact moment you decide to take the helm. The moment you choose to command, the mind stops being a jailer and becomes a servant. Because after all, the mind was never meant to be your enemy. It just needs a leader, and that leader must be you. If you truly want to command your mind, listen carefully to what I'm about to say. The power to command your mind lies in something you do every single day, yet hardly notice. The first key is simple. Realize that your mind is not you. It is like a wild horse, full of power, but without direction. Until you take the reins, it will run wherever it pleases, toward fear, anxiety, distraction, laziness. But when you seize the reins firmly, you choose the path. How do you do that? Picture the scene with me.
You wake up and your mind is already shouting, tossing worries, old memories, and thoughts of failure at you. Most people surrender and let the horse bolt. But from today on, you will breathe deeply, close your eyes for a few seconds, and give one clear order. Quiet. I am in command. It seems simple, and that's exactly why it works. The mind obeys those who speak with clarity. Commanding the mind isn't about winning a single battle in one day. It's about building a constant dialogue, as if you were training a stubborn apprentice. In the beginning, it resists. It pushes you back to old habits, to procrastination, to fears. But every time you pull it back into order, it's like laying another brick in the wall of your self-mastery. Think of an archer. He doesn't hit the target with his first arrow. He misses, adjusts, breathes, tries again. Until one day, almost without noticing, his arm, his gaze, and his heart align. The mind works the same way. You don't need to win all at once. You just need to choose not to quit. Now imagine your mind is a river. If you drop any object into it, the current carries it away. That's how random thoughts work. They appear and drag you along. But when you consciously decide to build a bridge over that river, you're no longer carried away by the current. You walk above it. That bridge is built through repetition, through phrases you declare to yourself every single day, through small victories, through firm decisions. And here's the secret that can change everything for you. The mind does not respond to vague orders. If you say, I think I can, it hears doubt. If you say, I will do it, it hears certainty. The command must be firm, clear, direct, like a general who does not ask, but commands. And the moment your mind recognizes that firmness, it stops fighting against you and begins fighting for you. Commanding the mind is not about suffocating bad thoughts. It's about transforming them into energy. The fear that once paralyzed you now becomes a sign that you're about to grow. The anxiety that once trapped you now becomes fuel to act. The doubt that once froze you now becomes curiosity to learn. That is the point where you stop being a slave to your mind and become its master. And I want you to keep this within you. Commanding the mind is not about brute force, it's about clarity. It's about telling yourself every single day who you are, what you accept, and where you're going. It's a living practice, a silent discipline, slowly building a fortress no one can invade. Now pay close attention. If you truly want to master your mind, you must understand two simple keys, yet they carry the power to transform inner empires: meditation and writing. Meditation is not about sitting still with your eyes closed, trying not to think of anything. Meditation is, in truth, the supreme training of command. It is you sitting in silence and realizing you are not obligated to follow every thought that appears. It's like watching cars pass on a highway. They go by, but you don't have to jump into every one of them. When you meditate, you are telling your mind, I observe you, but I am not you. That simple exercise creates space, and in that space, freedom is born. And why is this so powerful? Because every form of manipulation begins when you believe you are your thoughts. If the mind says you can't, you believe it. If the mind says you don't deserve it, you fall silent. But when you train through meditation, you begin to laugh at these thoughts. They appear, but they no longer have chains. You realize they're only clouds, not the sky. They're only waves, not the ocean. Now imagine combining this with the power of writing. Writing is not just recording words. It is a ritual of clarity. When you write what you feel, you take the invisible chaos of the mind and place it before you in the form of letters. And what happens? What once seemed enormous in your head looks small on paper. What once seemed confusing gains order. Writing is like holding the reins of a wild horse. Suddenly, you realize you can guide it. Many think writing down goals or thoughts is childish, but all the great ones who commanded their own minds, philosophers, leaders, sages, kept notebooks. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself every day, not to publish, but to command. Napoleon Hill said a desire only becomes real when it is written down. And Feynman used notebooks as a way to clarify ideas that, if left only in the mind, would get lost. When you meditate, you silence the noise. When you write, you organize what remains. Together, these two acts become like sword and shield on the battlefield of the mind. Now imagine this applied to your own life. You wake up, take a deep breath, sit in silence for a few minutes, watch your mind racing, and instead of fighting, you simply let it pass. Then, you take a notebook and write, "Today, I command my mind. Today, I act with focus. Today, I take one step closer to my dream." This combination is what separates those who live as slaves of the mind from those who live as its masters. Because in the end, it's not about silencing thoughts. It's about choosing which ones deserve to become action. Now, I want you to make a commitment to yourself. Write in the comments, "I command my mind," and start applying this power today. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let's transform ordinary minds into extraordinary ones together. Because your mind was never born to cage you. It was born to become your greatest ally.
You know, people often ask me how I managed to understand so many different things. Physics, mathematics, biology, even safe cracking and bongo drums. They assume there must be some kind of trick to it, some natural talent I was born with. But that's not really true. The truth is much simpler, and perhaps more useful. I learned how to learn. And once you know how to learn, everything becomes possible. Let me tell you about something that happened when I was working at Los Alamos during the war. We had all these brilliant people, some of the greatest minds in physics, and we were all working on this enormous problem. One day, I was sitting in the cafeteria with some colleagues, and they were discussing a particular aspect of neutron diffusion. The conversation was full of complex equations and technical terms, and I noticed that while everyone was nodding along, I had this uncomfortable feeling that I didn't really understand what we were talking about. Not deeply, anyway. Now, I could have just stayed quiet and pretended to understand. That's what most people do. But I had learned something important years before, something my father taught me when I was just a boy. He taught me that knowing the name of something is not the same as knowing something, and that distinction changed everything for me. My father used to take me on walks in the Catskill Mountains. He wasn't a scientist, he was in the uniform business, but he had this wonderful way of looking at the world. We'd see a bird, and he'd say, "You see that bird? In German, it's called a Pfeilstorch. In Chinese, they call it a Chungling. In Japanese, a Katakataka. You can know all those names in every language in the world, but when you're done, you'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. You'll only know about people in different places and what they call a bird." Now, he'd say, "That bird is a brown-throated thrush, and it's singing because it's defending its territory or attracting a mate. When it moves like that, it's looking for insects. That's beginning to know something." This lesson stuck with me, really stuck, because I realized that most of what we call knowledge is actually just familiarity with labels. We mistake the map for the territory. We think because we can name something, we understand it. But understanding is something else entirely. So back to that cafeteria at Los Alamos. When I felt that uncomfortable sensation of not really understanding, I did what I always do. I went back to my room, took out some paper, and I started to work through the problem myself. Not by memorizing what the others had said, but by trying to explain it to myself from scratch, as if I were teaching it to someone who knew nothing about physics. I wrote, "Okay, what is neutron diffusion really about? What's actually happening?" And then I tried to explain it in the simplest possible terms. Not using the fancy equations first, those would come later, but using plain language. I imagined I was explaining it to someone like my father, someone intelligent but without technical training. And here's what happened. I got stuck. I couldn't explain it simply because I didn't understand it well enough. There were gaps in my knowledge that I had been papering over with technical jargon. So I went back to the basic principles. I looked at what I did understand solidly, and I built up from there, piece by piece, always checking. Can I explain this simply? Does this make sense? When I finally could explain it in simple terms, something magical happened. I understood it better than I had before, much better. And more than that, I could see connections to other things I knew. I could see where the equations came from, what they really meant, why they had to be that way and not some other way. This became my method. Whenever I needed to learn something, anything, I would follow this same process. I'd take a blank piece of paper and I'd write at the top, "What is?" And then whatever concept I was trying to understand. Then I'd try to explain it as if I were teaching it to someone bright but completely unfamiliar with the subject. The key is that you can't fool yourself when you do this. You can fool yourself in a lot of ways. You can memorize equations. You can learn to manipulate symbols. You can even get the right answers on tests. But when you try to explain something in plain language, the truth comes out. If you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it. And let me be clear about what I mean by simply. I don't mean dumbing it down or being imprecise. I mean stripping away the unnecessary complexity, the jargon that we use to hide our lack of understanding. Einstein once said something about this, that you should be able to explain your theory to a barmaid. People laughed at that, but he was right. If you truly understand something, you can explain it in everyday language. The complexity should be in the idea itself, not in the words you use to describe it. I remember when I was trying to understand quantum electrodynamics after the war. This was a field in crisis. The theory made ridiculous predictions, infinities everywhere. People were stuck. I was stuck too, at first. I knew the mathematical machinery, sure, but I didn't really understand what was happening physically. So I started over. I got a notebook and I began to explain it to myself from the beginning. An electron moves from point A to point B. What really happens? I drew pictures, simple pictures, little arrows and lines. I didn't start with the Lagrangian formalism or the canonical approach. I started with, what is the simplest way to think about this? And you know what I discovered? All that fancy machinery that everyone was using, it was obscuring something much simpler underneath. By forcing myself to explain it simply, by using these little pictures I drew, I found a different way to do the calculations, a way that made sense to me physically. Those simple pictures eventually became what people call Feynman diagrams, and they helped solve some of the problems that had everyone confused. But here's what I want you to understand. The diagrams weren't the point. The point was the process of simplification, of explanation, of getting down to what's really happening. The diagrams were just a tool that came out of trying to understand clearly. Now, you might think this approach would be slow, and in one sense it is. It takes longer to really understand something this way than to just memorize formulas or to accept what authorities tell you. But in another sense, it's much faster. Because when you truly understand something, when you can explain it simply and clearly, you never forget it. It becomes part of how you think, and you can use it to understand new things. Because you're not just carrying around a bag of disconnected facts and formulas. You're carrying around principles that you understand deeply. I saw this when I taught at Caltech. Students would come to my office hours, frustrated because they couldn't solve a problem. They'd show me pages of equations they'd written. Look, they'd say, I know the formula, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I can't get the answer. And I'd ask them, what's the problem about? Physically, what's happening? Often, they couldn't tell me. They could write down the equation for conservation of energy, but they couldn't explain what energy conservation actually means. They could manipulate the symbols, but they didn't understand what the symbols represented. So I'd say, forget the equations for a moment. Tell me in words what's happening in this problem, and we'd talk through it. A ball is rolling down a hill. What does that mean? It means it's losing potential energy. Where does that energy go? Into kinetic energy, into movement. How much? Well, it depends on the height of the hill and the mass of the ball. Once they understood it that way, the equations weren't mysterious anymore. The equations were just a precise way of writing down what they already understood. They became tools instead of obstacles. This is what I mean by learning. Not memorization, not symbol manipulation. Understanding. There's another part to this, though, something equally important. When you explain something to yourself this way, you discover what you don't know. You find the boundaries of your understanding, and that's incredibly valuable. Most people avoid these boundaries. They stay in the safe zone of what they already know, or they pretend the boundaries aren't there. But the boundaries are where all the interesting stuff is. That's where learning happens. That's where the adventure begins. I remember reading about biology later in my life. I was curious about it, but I didn't have the years of background that a professional biologist would have. So I'd read a paper, and I'd come across something like the Krebs cycle, and I'd think, do I really know what that is? So I'd stop and I'd get a piece of paper and I'd try to explain the Krebs cycle to myself. What is it? Why does it happen? What's the purpose? And I'd get stuck on some step. I didn't understand why this molecule becomes that molecule. So I'd look it up. I'd read more carefully. I'd draw it out. And gradually, piece by piece, I'd build up my understanding. The beautiful thing about this method is that it works for anything. Physics, mathematics, biology, history, philosophy, it doesn't matter. The principle is the same. Take an idea and explain it to yourself simply. Find the gaps, fill them in, build from solid ground. And here's something else I discovered. When you learn this way, you often find that the experts don't understand things as well as you thought. You find inconsistencies in their explanations. You find gaps in the standard way of teaching things. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you find a better way to think about something, a clearer way, because you refuse to accept confusion. I'm not saying this to criticize experts. I'm saying it because it's liberating. You don't have to wait for someone else to explain things perfectly. You don't have to feel inadequate because a textbook confuses you. Sometimes a textbook is just poorly written. Sometimes even the experts are confused. Your job is to understand for yourself in your own way. Of course, you have to be honest with yourself, brutally honest. You can't fake understanding. When you try to explain something and you realize you're just using circular definitions or you're hand-waving over the hard parts, you have to stop and admit, I don't actually get this yet. That's okay. That's good, actually, because now you know what you need to work on. You've turned a vague feeling of confusion into a specific question, and specific questions can be answered. I think one reason many people struggle to learn new things as they get older is not because their minds are less capable, that's mostly nonsense, but because they become less willing to admit confusion. They have identities as knowledgeable people, as experts in their fields, and it's uncomfortable to feel like a beginner again, so they stay on familiar ground. But learning requires that beginner's mind. It requires being willing to say, I don't understand this yet, but I'm going to figure it out. No shame in that, no embarrassment, just curiosity and determination. When I was at Los Alamos, Hans Bethe was there, brilliant physicist, one of the best. And I noticed something about him. Whenever someone explained a new idea to him, he wouldn't just nod and accept it. He'd work through it himself, right there, often asking questions that seemed almost naive. Wait, why does that follow? I don't see how you got from this step to that step. But those naive questions often revealed that the person explaining hadn't really thought it through properly. Bethe taught me that real understanding means being able to answer the simple question, the fundamental why question. If you can't answer those, you're building on sand. So here's what I learned, and what I've tried to practice throughout my life. Learning is not about accumulating information. It's not about being able to recite facts or manipulate symbols. Learning is about building a structure of understanding, brick by brick, where each brick is solid, and you know why it's where it is. You start with what you understand clearly. You expand from there, always checking. Can I explain this simply? Does this make sense? When you hit something you can't explain simply, that's not a failure, that's a discovery. You found the edge of your understanding. Now you can work on extending it. And you know what happens when you learn this way? You become independent. You don't need to rely on authorities or textbooks or experts to tell you what's true. You can figure things out yourself. You develop judgment. You can tell when someone is explaining something clearly and when they're hiding behind jargon. You can tell when you really understand something and when you're fooling yourself. This independence of mind, that's the real value. Not just the specific things you learn, but the ability to learn anything. The confidence that comes from knowing you can take any subject, no matter how complex or unfamiliar, and gradually make sense of it. There's a freedom in this. You're not trapped by your past education or lack of it. You're not limited by what subjects you studied in school. If you want to understand something, really understand it, you can. It might take time. It might take effort, but it's possible. I've watched people talk themselves out of learning things because they think they're not good at math, or not a science person, or whatever story they've told themselves. But those are just stories. If you're willing to start simple, admit confusion, and work through things step by step, you can understand anything. I think about my father's lesson with the bird. All those fancy names in all those languages, they're easy to collect. You can fill your head with them. You can impress people at parties, but they're empty. Real knowledge is different. Real knowledge is understanding what the bird is doing and why. Real knowledge lets you make predictions, see connections, understand how things work. And the beautiful thing is, anyone can do this. You don't need to be specially gifted. You don't need advanced degrees. You just need curiosity, honesty, and patience. You need to be willing to start simple, to admit confusion, to work through things step by step. I've spent my whole life trying to understand things, and I'm still doing it. There's always more to learn, more to figure out. And every time I sit down with a piece of paper and try to explain something to myself, I'm using the same method I developed as a young man. It never gets old because understanding never gets old. The pleasure of figuring something out, of seeing clearly what was once murky, that never diminishes. So if there's a secret to learning anything fast, it's this. Don't try to go fast, try to go deep. Try to really understand. Explain it simply. Find the gaps, fill them in. Build on solid ground. The speed comes naturally when your foundation is strong. What looks like slow, careful work at the beginning becomes rapid progress later, because you're not constantly backtracking to fix misunderstandings or rememorizing things you never really grasped. And remember, the goal isn't to know more than other people, or to be clever, or to impress anyone. The goal is to see clearly, to understand truly. Everything else, the success, the recognition, the ability to solve difficult problems, that all comes as a byproduct of genuine understanding. Chase understanding, and the rest takes care of itself. That's what I learned anyway. And it served me pretty well.
Successful people think differently because they're not worried about other people's judgment. While the world criticizes, they create. While most people are busy protecting their reputation, they're too busy searching for the truth. And here's the key. Thinking differently is not an aesthetic choice. It's an intellectual survival skill. If you think like everyone else, you'll end up with the same results as everyone else. And the average is harsh. Uninspiring jobs, lives with no purpose, routines where people wake up, work, complain, and go to sleep. Nothing more. Is that really living? Or is it just surviving? Pay close attention now, because this may change the course of your life. Think differently, or die average. Stop believing what everyone else believes. Stop repeating what everyone else says. Every success story begins with someone who dared to disagree with normality. Not because they wanted to look rebellious, but because curiosity was stronger than the fear of judgment. And it's this curiosity, directed and disciplined, that opens doors the average will never see. So think differently. And if you decide to think differently, prepare yourself for something greater. The freedom to learn anything, to create paths no one has created, to master your own mind. Listen carefully now, because what I'm about to reveal lies behind every genius mind: curiosity. Ordinary people lose curiosity over time. They accept ready-made answers, stop asking questions, stop investigating. They think they already know enough. And that's the moment mediocrity sets in. Now look at the people who truly stood out. Scientists, entrepreneurs, creative leaders. They all had one thing in common. They never stopped asking questions. Even if they didn't understand something, they would ask again and again and again until the answer finally made sense in their mind. This is the first step to thinking differently. Many people are embarrassed to raise their hand and say, "I don't understand," afraid of being criticized. In a classroom, the student who asks too many questions is easily labeled as stupid. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The one who asks questions is one step ahead. The one who questions shows the courage to learn. That's why, if you want to start thinking differently, begin with the simple act of admitting your doubt. The courage to ask is the mark of someone who refuses to remain ordinary. Now pay attention to me, because I'll show you how to truly think differently. Thinking differently is a daily exercise in intellectual freedom. The first step is to do what you love. When you work or study something that sparks passion, your energy multiplies. Normal is waking up tired because you spend energy on activities that don't inspire you. Different is waking up hungry for life because you're investing your time in what makes sense. Ask yourself, if nobody judged me, what would I choose to learn, to create, or to build? That answer points to your true path. Second, protect your mental independence. That means not letting other people's opinions become the filter for what you think or do. Most people fear being criticized, fear being called strange. But remember, everyone who changed the world was ridiculed before they were applauded. Thinking differently always bothers people because it exposes the mediocrity of those who follow the herd. Third, feed your curiosity without fear. Ask, test, explore. That's the fuel of innovation. Don't accept anything just because everyone does it this way. Ask yourself, is there another way? The simple act of questioning already puts you on another level. Fourth, simplify your life to free up energy for the essential. Those who think like everyone else get lost in excess. Those who think differently focus on what matters. If you're exhausted, it's hard to have the clarity to think in a new way. Energy is born from being aligned with purpose, eliminating the unnecessary, and putting strength into what truly moves your life. Pay close attention now, because what I'm about to tell you is one of the mind's biggest prisons, the fear of being different. Most people don't live their own ideas. They live other people's ideas. They're shaped by the opinions of family, friends, society, the media. They spend life trying to please, to fit in, to be accepted. But those who think differently understand something simple. If you always seek approval, you'll never have clarity. To think differently, you must learn to shield your mind against the pressure of the majority. And that starts with a daily exercise. Every time you feel tempted to do something just because everyone does it, stop and ask, does this really make sense to me? Does it bring me closer to what I want? Or does it just make me like everyone else? That simple question is enough to expose the automatic choices that keep you stuck in the average. Remember, life is too short to live dependent on other people's approval. Another point, choose carefully the voices you listen to. I'm not saying ignore everything and everyone, but be discerning. Ask yourself, does this person have results I admire? Do they live what they preach? Or do they just repeat what they've heard? If not, why give their opinion so much weight? Learn to separate constructive criticism from noise. And here's a powerful detail. The courage to stand by your own vision earns respect, even from those who disagree. At first, you may be criticized. You may even be ridiculed. But over time, when results appear, the same people who laughed at you go quiet. Nothing is more convincing than the evidence of a life lived with purpose and authenticity. Thinking differently is swimming against the current. It's bearing the pressure of judgment without giving in. It's choosing the clarity of your conscience over the empty applause of the crowd. And when you train yourself in this, you realize that freedom isn't being accepted. It's living true to what you believe, even if no one claps. Thinking differently isn't an inborn talent. It's a trained habit. You're not born outside the box. You build the box and then learn to break it every day. That takes discipline, and discipline is born from rituals. If you want to stand out, you need to turn curiosity and mental independence into concrete actions that shape how you think. The first ritual is the daily question. Pick any situation in your life and ask, why is this done this way? Don't accept the first answer. Go deeper. Who said it has to be like this? Is there a better, simpler, faster way to do it? When repeated every day, this exercise trains your mind not to settle for ready-made answers. The second ritual is explaining out loud. When you learn something new, don't keep it to yourself. Explain it. Even if it's to the mirror, when you speak, your mind organizes, your ideas align, and the gaps show up. That's the moment you discover if you truly understood. This simple habit will accelerate your ability to learn 10 times more than someone who only reads and repeats. The third ritual is creative review. At the end of the day, take one idea or important concept you learned and recreate it in your own words. Use a metaphor, a story, an example from your life. This act of recreation makes the idea stop being external and become part of you. It's in this act that different thinking begins to flourish. And finally, the ritual of conscious observation. Set aside a few minutes to observe something ordinary and ask yourself, what is no one else seeing here? It could be an object, a situation, even a conversation. This practice trains your eyes to see beyond the obvious. That's how innovations are born, from someone who looked at the ordinary and saw the extraordinary. Those who practice these rituals don't just think differently, they begin to live on another level of perception. And that difference builds up day after day until it becomes an advantage impossible to ignore. But here's the truth. The path of those who think differently is never easy. They are misunderstood, judged, often humiliated. The crowd cannot stand those who break the pattern because independent thinking exposes the mediocrity of those who prefer to follow the herd. It's easier to call someone crazy than to admit they might have seen something you didn't. But listen, every great person you admire went through this. Galileo was condemned for seeing beyond what the church accepted. Bruce Lee was ridiculed for mixing styles and creating his own philosophy. All of them were seen as too different until the world had to bow to the evidence of what they built. And here's the secret few have the courage to accept. Thinking differently is expensive in the beginning, but it pays dividends forever. The rejection you feel today is the same energy that will fuel your victory tomorrow. This is the path of those who refuse to die average. They choose truth over acceptance, curiosity over indifference, courage over fear. And with that, they build something that lasts, something that inspires, something that cannot be erased. So I tell you, if you want to think differently, be prepared to be misunderstood, be ready to be criticized, but also be certain that in the end you will be remembered. Because no one remembers the crowd that merely repeated. History remembers the names of those who dared to be unique. Think differently, protect your flame, and never bow to mediocrity. Because in the end, you either have the courage to live as an exception, or you accept dying as just another in the average. Now it's on you. I want you to prove to yourself that you've chosen to think differently. Write in the comments, I will never accept dying being influenced. This phrase is more than words. It's a pact with your mind, a declaration that you will not bow to mediocrity. And if you enjoyed this lesson, leave your like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because here you'll keep receiving ideas that will challenge your mind, expand your vision, and accelerate your learning. Remember, those who think like the majority live like the majority, but those who choose to think differently create a destiny the crowd could never imagine. You think you know how vision works. You open your eyes, the world floods in, and there it is, reality, crisp and clear. You see a face, a wall, a car. It feels immediate, it feels simple, but you are completely wrong. What you think is a passive act of seeing is actually a computational miracle so complex it makes quantum mechanics look like a game of tic-tac-toe. The fact that you can see anything at all is, statistically speaking, ridiculous. You aren't seeing objects. You are decoding a chaotic, violent mess of invisible vibrations that are hammering against your face from every possible angle, all at once. And somehow, your brain doesn't explode. Imagine you are sitting by the side of a swimming pool. It's a hot day, crowded. A dozen people dive in at the same time. Kids are splashing in the shallow end. Someone is doing laps. A lifeguard throws a float. The surface of the water is a disaster zone. It's a choppy, chaotic mixture of waves crashing into waves, ripples bouncing off the walls, reflections colliding with disturbances. It looks like random noise. But now, imagine a super intelligent insect sitting in the very corner of that pool, just floating on the surface tension. This bug is blind. It cannot see the swimmers. It cannot see the diving board. All it can feel is the water bobbing up and down right where it is sitting. Here is where it gets insane. If that insect is clever enough, and we are talking about a level of cleverness that rivals a supercomputer, it could theoretically analyze the rhythm of those bumps and jiggles in the corner and reconstruct exactly who jumped in, where they jumped, how big they were, and what kind of swimsuit they were wearing. Just by feeling the choppiness in one tiny corner, it could mathematically work backward to build a perfect 3D image of the entire pool. That sounds impossible, doesn't it? Calculating the position of a dozen swimmers just by the way the water laps against a concrete wall. That is exactly what your eyes are doing right now. The light filling this room behaves exactly like that swimming pool, except it is not water, and it is not two-dimensional. It is a three-dimensional soup of waves. Light waves are bouncing off every object in the room, the chair, the floor, your hand, the wall behind you. They are scattering in every conceivable direction, mixing together, crossing paths, and creating a field of electromagnetic choppiness that is infinitely more complex than any swimming pool. And you? You have two tiny instruments, little holes about 1/8 of an inch wide that catch a microscopic sample of this chaos. Your eye is that super intelligent bug. It takes this jumbled mess of shaking light waves that enter through the pupil and instantly disentangles them. It figures out that this specific ripple came from the lamp, and that specific wobble came from the reflection on the table. It separates the waves that bounced off a red apple from the waves that came from a white wall, even though they arrived at your eye mixed together in a single beam of confusion.
It is an analytical feat that we take for granted every single millisecond, and we can verify this complexity easily. If you look at a person standing in front of you, you see them. But someone standing to your left can look at a person standing to your right. The light from the person on the right travels across your face to the person on the left. The light from the person in front of you travels straight into your eyes. These streams of light are crossing each other right in front of your nose. They are occupying the same space at the same time. In a swimming pool, if two waves crash, they distort each other. But light? It is a linear wave system. The waves pass right through one another without getting tangled. It is a complete network of traffic, billions of information highways crossing in a single point of space, and yet they do not crash. People like to think of light as little arrows shooting through the air. You picture a ray of light leaving a bulb and hitting a book. That is a comforting mental image, but it is a lie. It is not arrows, it is a field. Think of it like a universal jelly filling the room. When a light turns on, it shakes the jelly. We call this the electromagnetic field. The arrows you imagine are just the direction the energy is traveling, but the reality is just a shaking, oscillating quantity at a specific point in space. It goes up and down, up and down. And this shaking is so elaborate, so layered with information from every object it touched, that the result is an influence that allows you to perceive a distinct reality while completely ignoring the light that is crossing your path to reach someone else. But here is where our arrogance as humans gets in the way. We think we see the world. We don't. We see a tiny, pathetic sliver of it. Going back to our swimming pool analogy, imagine that the water has all kinds of waves. Some are big, crashing waves from a cannonball dive. Some are tiny, high-frequency ripples from a raindrop. Now imagine our genius insect in the corner is picky. It decides it is only going to pay attention to waves that are exactly 2 inches apart. If a wave is 3 inches long, invisible. If it's 1 inch, doesn't exist. Your eye is that picky insect. The electromagnetic field is shaking with waves of all different sizes, but your retina is tuned, biologically, to accept only a very specific range of vibrations. We call this visible light. The waves we can see are roughly between 40 and 70 millionths of an inch long. That is it. That is your entire window on the universe. If the waves are a little bit shorter, we call them ultraviolet, and you are blind to them. If they are a little bit longer, we call them infrared, and you are blind to them too. But just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there. They are crashing into you right now. Let's talk about those slower swashes. The waves that are just a little too long for your eye to focus. We have another name for this, heat. When you stand next to a campfire, you feel warmth on your skin. That sensation is your body detecting electromagnetic waves that are physically identical to light, just with a slightly longer distance between the crests. You feel the light rather than see it. But other creatures aren't so limited. Take the pit viper. This snake hunts in the desert at night. It has a specialized organ, a pit, that is sensitive to these longer waves. To a pit viper, a mouse running across the sand isn't just a warm object. It is a glowing beacon of infrared light. The mouse is radiating waves by virtue of its body heat. The snake sees the heat. We are blind to it, stumbling around in the dark, while the viper is watching a light show. But let's go even longer. Stretch those waves out further. Make them huge. These waves are still rushing through the room. They are passing through your body, through the walls, through the earth itself. We call them radio waves. And here is the thing that should keep you up at night. This room is currently full of music. It is full of voices. It is full of data. Right now, occupying the same space as the light you are using to read this, there is a broadcast from a radio station in Moscow. There is a signal from a GPS satellite. There is a song being broadcast from Peru. There is radar from an airplane looking for the ground. It is all there. It is all shaking the electromagnetic field in the room. The voice of a singer in London is physically present in the space between your eyes and this screen, vibrating the electrons in the air. You just don't have the machinery to notice it. Your eyes are tuned to the light channel, not the radio channel. But the physics is identical. It is exactly the same stuff. It is just a matter of timing.
The wiggling of the field is slower for radio than it is for blue light. That is the only difference. If you don't believe that reality is this crowded, you can prove it with a piece of wire and a cheap box of electronics. We call it a radio receiver. The wire is just a metal stick. The electrons inside that wire are being pushed back and forth by the electric field in the room. They are swashing around like water in a bathtub, but they are swashing at all different speeds at once. The Moscow speed, the top 40 speed, the air traffic control speed. When you turn the knob on the radio, you aren't finding the signal. You are building a filter. You are telling the box, ignore everything except the electrons that are wiggling exactly 1 million times per second. And suddenly, out of the static, you hear a voice. The voice didn't just arrive, it was screaming in your ear the whole time. You just needed the right tool to translate the wiggle into sound. That is why the rainbow happened. Not because of a tank in mud, but because blue light is slightly better at bullying the electrons in the glass than red light is. This is the beauty of looking deeper. When you stop accepting the high school simplified version, you find connections you never knew existed. Who would have thought that the colors of a rainbow are directly determined by the mechanics of a driven spring? But this model creates a new problem. If light is just shaking electrons, and those electrons are re-radiating light, doesn't that take energy? Why is the glass transparent at all? Why doesn't the light just get absorbed and die? And what happens if you push the electron exactly at its resonant frequency? Does the glass explode? We've destroyed the tank, but now we have to rebuild the universe. And to do that, we need to talk about what happens when the math goes to infinity. If you thought this was weird, just wait until we talk about the imaginary numbers. We left off with a terrifying thought. If the blue light is closer to the electron's natural resonant frequency, it makes the electron wiggle harder. But what happens if you hit the resonant frequency exactly? If you tune your light to be perfectly in sync with that spring? According to the simplified equation we just built, the denominator becomes 0. And any math student knows that dividing by 0 is the universe's way of saying system crash. The equation predicts the amplitude of the wiggle would go to infinity. The electron would vibrate with infinite energy, presumably ripping a hole in space-time or at least shattering your window. Obviously, that doesn't happen. You don't see windows exploding just because a specific shade of UV light hit them. So, what did we miss? We missed reality. Our model of the electron on a spring was too perfect. It was frictionless. In the real world, you never get a free ride. When an electron wiggles, it is radiating energy 3. That secondary wave it creates, that costs energy. The electron is paying a tax to the universe every time it moves. In physics, we call this damping or a drag force. It's exactly like trying to run through water. The faster you try to go, the harder the water pushes back. When we add this drag term to our equation, it saves us from the infinity disaster. It puts a cap on how much the electron can wiggle, even at perfect resonance. But this drag does something else. It explains opacity. It explains why light doesn't go through a brick wall. If the drag is high, the energy from the light wave is chewed up by the electrons and turned into heat, rather than being passed along as a transparent wave. So, the very thing that stops the universe from crashing is also the reason you can't see through your own eyelids. The faster-than-light scandal. Now that we've fixed the model, we have to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the cheetah in the room. A lot of you have asked a very dangerous question. Can the index of refraction be less than 1? But wait, I hear you scream, clutching your copy of Special Relativity. Einstein said nothing can travel faster than light. You are breaking the law. Relax. Einstein is fine. The police are not coming. This is where you have to understand the difference between a phase and a signal. Remember how we said the slowing down was actually just a phase shift? A shifting of the wave crests backward? Well, under certain weird conditions, usually near that resonant frequency we talked about, the phase shift can actually go the other way. The interaction can kick the crests forward. This means the peaks of the wave appear to be traveling faster than c. This is called the phase velocity. But here is the trick. A continuous sine wave conveys zero information. It's just a monotonous hum. Beep, 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 forever. So Newton proved that the invisible rubber band holding the moon is the same one that smacks apples onto your head. Genius. But this created a problem, a big, wet, sloshing problem called the ocean. Everyone knows the moon causes the tides. It pulls the water. Simple, right? Wrong. If the moon simply pulled the water toward it, you would expect one high tide a day, when the moon is directly overhead, pulling the water up into a big bump. But that is not what happened. If you go to the beach, you know there are 2 high tides a day. There is a bump of water on the side facing the moon, but there is also a mysterious, rebellious bump of water on the exact opposite side of the earth, facing away from the moon. For a long time, this drove people crazy. One school of thought said, the moon pulls the water. Another school of thought said, no, the moon pulls the earth away from the water. They were fighting over who was right. Newton came along and said, you are both right, and you are both missing the point. The secret isn't just pull, it is difference. Gravity gets weaker with distance. We just learned that with the inverse square law. Here is what is actually happening. Imagine the earth is 3 separate pieces. The water on the side facing the moon, the solid earth in the middle, and the water on the far side. The moon's gravity pulls the hardest on the water that is close to it, so that water gets ripped away from the earth a little bit. That's your first high tide. The solid earth is further away, so the moon pulls it with medium strength. But the water on the far side? It is the furthest away, so the moon's pull is the weakest there. The result? The moon pulls the earth away from the backwater. It stretches the whole planet into a football shape. The water bulges out on both sides, not because the moon is lifting it, but because the gravitational field is tearing the planet slightly apart. But wait, it gets weirder. We have this arrogant idea that the earth is a giant, immovable rock, and the moon is a little pebble running circles around us. We think we are the center of the dance. We aren't. The moon is heavy. It is big enough to throw its weight around. The force of the moon on the earth is balanced, sure, but how? By the earth doing its own little circle. The earth is actually spinning around a point that isn't its center. Imagine a heavy father holding hands with his small child and spinning in a circle. The child flies through the air, but the father doesn't just stand like a statue. He leans back. He wobbles. He makes a small circle with his feet to counter the weight of the child. That is the earth. We are wobbling in a circle to balance the moon. We are throwing our weight around. This creates a centrifugal force that helps throw that water off the far side, adding to the tide. So the reason you can surf twice a day is because the earth is doing a clumsy waltz with a giant rock in space. This gravitational pulling and spinning explains everything about the shape of our world. Why is the earth round? Because gravity pulls everything in toward the center. Why isn't it perfectly round? Because it is spinning, and the centrifugal force throws the middle out a little bit, like pizza dough when you toss it. It balances out. Everything, the sun, the moon, the planets, they are all fighting this battle between the crush of gravity and the fling of the spin. Now, once Newton handed us these laws, scientists went on a power trip. They started measuring everything to see if Newton was as smart as he thought he was. They wanted to break the laws. The best place to test this was Jupiter. Jupiter is like a mini solar system. It has moons whizzing around it like clockwork. Literally, like clockwork. You could predict exactly when a moon would disappear behind the planet and when it would pop out the other side. It was the perfect cosmic watch. So, astronomers started timing it. They watched Jupiter's moons for years. They expected perfection. If Newton was right, the schedule should be flawless. But it wasn't. They found something disturbing. Sometimes the moons were ahead of schedule. Sometimes they were behind. And not just by a second. We are talking about 8 minutes. 8 minutes is an eternity in physics. The error wasn't random. That is the key. If it were random, it would mean the equipment was bad. But there was a pattern. When Jupiter was close to Earth in its orbit, the moons were ahead of schedule. When Jupiter was on the far side of the solar system, away from Earth, the moons were late. The clock seemed to slow down when it was far away. This didn't make sense. Does gravity get lazy when you aren't looking? Does the universe have lag? A clever fellow named Romer looked at this mess and realized something that shattered our perception of reality. The
The moons weren't late. The news was. We assume that when we look at something, we see it now, instantaneously. Romer realized that was a lie. He concluded that it takes time for light to travel from Jupiter to Earth. When Jupiter is far away, the light has to travel an extra distance across the solar system to reach our eyes. That extra trip takes time, about 16 minutes to cross the Earth's orbit diameter. So when we see the moon pop out from behind Jupiter, we aren't seeing it happen now. We are seeing it happen in the past. We are watching a delayed broadcast. Romer used those errors in the schedule to calculate the speed of light. Think about that. They used the law of gravity to find the speed of light. If they didn't trust Newton's law of gravity, they would have just thought their clocks were broken or the moons were weird. But because they trusted the law, they knew the error had to be a new discovery. This is how science works. It is not a list of facts, it is an avalanche. One discovery creates a tool. That tool cracks open a new door. That door reveals a new mystery. Newton gave us the math to understand the orbits. The orbits gave us the anomaly in Jupiter. The anomaly gave us the speed of light. The speed of light eventually gave us Einstein and the theory of relativity. It is a continuous, crashing process that has been running for 400 years. We are still in that avalanche. We are still falling forward, faster and faster. The universe is full of these invisible waves, these bending forces, these delayed signals from the past. It is chaotic, it is messy, and it is beautiful. You don't need a PhD to appreciate it. You just need to stop assuming the world is simple. It isn't. It is an intricate puzzle waiting for you to notice the pieces that don't fit. So next time you look at the moon, or the tide, or a light bulb, remember, you are watching a cosmic machine at work. If you want to keep peeling back the layers of this reality, you know what to do. Smash that like button, subscribe for more brain-breaking science, and let me know in the comments, what fact about the universe do you suspect is completely wrong? Let's argue about it.
Try to imagine nothing. Absolute nothing. No air, no light, no particles, no stuff of any kind. Just pure emptiness. You can't do it. I mean, you think you can. You picture blackness, you picture void, but even that blackness is something. Even imagining empty space, you're imagining space. And space turns out to be very much something. This is where it gets strange. This is where your intuition completely fails you. So here's the question. What's between the atom? You learned in school that everything is made of atoms, fine, and you probably picture them like little balls, little solid spheres packed together to make stuff. But they're not packed together. They're not even close to each other. There's space between them, enormous amounts of space relative to their size. And what fills that space? Most people say, nothing. Empty void. The atoms are the stuff, and between them is just absence, just distance, just nothing waiting for something to happen. Wrong. Completely wrong. Between every atom in your body, between every atom in this room, between every atom everywhere, something exists. Something real, something physical, something that carries energy and exerts force and holds the entire universe together. Let me show you what I mean. Put your hand on a table. Go ahead, actually do it if there's a table nearby. You feel that? Solid, hard. Your hand stops, the table stops it. Seems like the most basic thing in the world. But your hand never touched that table. The atoms in your hand never made contact with the atoms in the table, not even close. See, the outer edge of every atom is surrounded by electrons, little negative charges buzzing around the nucleus. And when your hand gets close to the table, the electrons in your hand approach the electrons in the table. Negative approaching negative. Same charge. And what do same charges do? They repel. They push each other away. They absolutely refuse to occupy the same space. So what you feel when you touch that table, that sensation of solidity, that pressure, that stop, it's not atoms hitting atoms. It's electrical repulsion, fields pushing against fields. The electrons in your hand getting close enough to the electrons in the table that their electric fields start screaming at each other. No, 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 you can't come here. Go back. This space is taken. And your brain interprets that electromagnetic repulsion as touch, as solid, as contact. But there's a gap. There's always a gap. Your atoms and the table's atoms never meet. They never make contact. They're always separated by this invisible cushion of electric force. You're floating right now. Did you know that? You're not actually sitting on your chair. You're hovering above it, suspended by electromagnetic repulsion, floating on an invisible cushion of force. You've been floating your whole life. Every time you thought you touched something, you were hovering just above it. Now think about what this means for the question we started with. What's between the atoms? Field, electric field, electromagnetic field. And these fields are not nothing. People make this mistake all the time. They think fields are just a mathematical convenience, a way of calculating things, a shortcut. No, the field is there. It exists in space. It carries energy. It has momentum. It does things. Every charged particle, every electron, every proton creates an electric field that extends outward in all directions, not just nearby, all the way out, getting weaker with distance, but never quite reaching zero. In principle, the electric field from an electron in your fingertip extends across the entire universe. So, atoms aren't isolated little balls floating in nothing. They're the centers of these fields that spread outward and overlap and interact. The space between atoms is filled with field, layer upon layer of electromagnetic influence. When you look at matter, when you look at solid stuff, what you're really seeing is a dense web of overlapping fields, electrons repelling electrons, creating the illusion of solidity through pure electromagnetic force. The stuff isn't the atoms. The stuff is the field. The atoms are just the places where the fields get intense, where the action concentrates, but the fields themselves extend everywhere. Between every atom in your body, right now, fields are pushing and pulling, maintaining structure, holding molecules together, keeping you from collapsing or flying apart. Chemical bonds, the things that hold atoms together into molecules, those are electromagnetic fields doing work. The structure of matter is field structure. So, already the answer to what's between the atoms is not nothing. It's field. It's electromagnetic influence. It's the invisible fabric that makes touching possible by making it impossible. You never touch anything precisely because there's something between you and everything else. And that something is the field. But here's where it gets even stranger. So we've established that the space between atoms is filled with fields, electromagnetic fields reaching out from every charged particle, overlapping, interacting, creating the invisible fabric that holds everything together. But that's not the whole story. That's not even the weird part yet. Let me ask you something. What happens if you remove all the atoms? Not just some of them, all of them. You take a region of space and you pump out every single particle of matter, every atom, every molecule, every speck of dust. You create the most perfect vacuum possible. Now what's there? Nothing, right? That's what vacuum means. That's what empty means. You took everything out, so nothing remains. So, here's the thing. Physics says you're wrong. Nature absolutely refuses to be empty. The universe will not allow true nothingness to exist anywhere, ever, under any circumstances. This comes from quantum mechanics, from something called the uncertainty principle. And look, most people have heard of the uncertainty principle, but they think it's about measurement, about how observing things changes them. That's part of it, but there's something deeper. The uncertainty principle says certain pairs of properties cannot both be exactly determined at the same time. Position and momentum, you can't know both precisely, but also, and this is the important part, energy and time. You cannot have a region of space with exactly zero energy for any extended period. It's forbidden. The mathematics won't allow it. Perfect emptiness would require perfect precision, exactly zero energy. And quantum mechanics says, no, you don't get that kind of precision. Nature doesn't work that way. So what happens instead? The vacuum fluctuates. Even with nothing in it, Even with every particle removed, space itself is restless. It shivers. It can't hold still. Pairs of particles appear out of nowhere, literally out of nothing. A particle and its antiparticle, an electron and a positron, a quark and an antiquark. They pop into existence spontaneously. They exist for an incredibly brief moment, so short you almost can't define it. And then they find each other, annihilate, and vanish. Gone, like they were never there. Virtual particles, they're called. Virtual because you can't catch them, can't trap them in a jar and study them. They exist too briefly, but they're real. They have effects, measurable effects. So, now you're asking, wait, where does the energy come from? You can't make particles out of nothing. That violates conservation of energy. Something can't come from nothing. Good question, really good question. But here's how nature handles it. The uncertainty principle allows you to borrow energy from nowhere, as long as you pay it back fast enough. The shorter the loan, the more you can borrow. Virtual particles pop into existence on borrowed energy, exist for a fleeting instant, then annihilate and pay back the debt before the universe notices. It's like taking money from a cash register, buying something, then returning it and putting the money back before anyone checks the books. As long as everything balances at the end, it's allowed. Nature runs on credit at the quantum scale. Constant borrowing and repaying, everywhere, all the time. And this isn't theoretical speculation. This isn't physicists playing mathematical games. We can measure this. There's an experiment called the Casimir effect that proves empty space isn't empty. You take two metal plates, very thin, very flat, and you put them incredibly close together in a vacuum, almost touching but not quite. Tiny gap between them, and they attract. They pull toward each other. Not gravity, that's way too weak at this scale. Not static electricity, nothing's charged. The plates are neutral. The space between them is empty. There's no reason for them to move. But they do. They pull together. Squeezed by nothing, pushed by empty space itself. So, why? Virtual particles. See, virtual particles have wavelengths, like waves in the ocean, different sizes of oscillation. When the plates are very close, some wavelengths don't fit between them. Those virtual particles can't pop into existence in that gap because there's no room for their wavelength. So you get fewer virtual particles between the plates than outside them. More quantum activity outside, less inside. That imbalance creates pressure. More pushing in than pushing out. The plates move together. This has been measured precisely. The force matches exactly what quantum mechanics predicts. Empty space exerts pressure. The vacuum pushes things around. Now think about what this means for our question. What's between the atoms? Fields, yes, but those fields aren't just sitting there quietly. The space between atoms, that space filled with electromagnetic fields, it's also churning with virtual particles, appearing, disappearing, borrowing energy, paying it back, billions of times per second. The emptiness inside matter is not empty. It's the busiest place you can imagine. Creation and destruction happening constantly at scales too small and too fast to directly observe. And this is true everywhere, not just between atoms in your body. The space between here and the moon, between stars, between galaxies, same thing. Virtual particles flickering in and out. The vacuum seething with activity. There is no quiet place in the universe. There is no spot where truly nothing happened. You cannot find emptiness. Nowhere in the cosmos does actual nothing exist. Physics won't allow it. So the vacuum churns with virtual particles. The space between atoms buzzes with fields and quantum fluctuations. Emptiness, true emptiness, doesn't exist anywhere. Now let's put this all together and see what it really means. People think about the vacuum as absence, the default state. What's left when you remove all the interesting stuff? The boring background where things happen. But that's completely backward. The vacuum isn't absence, it's foundation. It's not what remains when you take everything away. It's what everything comes out of. The vacuum is the ground state of reality, the quietest possible configuration of the fields that fill all of space. And even that quietest state cannot be perfectly still. So here's the part that really twists your brain. Particles aren't stuff that exists in empty space. Particles are the fields doing something. A particle is just a ripple in a field, an excitation, a place where the field vibrates a little harder than the quiet background hum. The electron isn't a little ball sitting in the electromagnetic field. The electron is the electromagnetic field, bunched up, concentrated, doing something more intense than usual. And those fields exist everywhere, not just where particles are, everywhere. The whole universe is filled with fields, overlapping, extending through all of space. And particles are just the places where those fields get excited. And think about what this means for you, for what you are. You're made of atoms. Those atoms are mostly empty space, but that empty space is filled with fields, and those fields are fluctuating with virtual particles. And the particles themselves, the electrons and quarks that seem so solid, they're just excitations in deeper fields. There's no bottom. There's no foundation. There's no solid stuff that everything else is made of. You zoom in looking for the ultimate substance. The bedrock reality keeps dissolving. Atoms are mostly empty. The empty is full of field. The fields are full of fluctuations. The particles are made of field excitations. Fields all the way down. So, it's like looking for the bottom of a lake and discovering the lake has no bottom. Just water all the way down, getting stranger and darker the deeper you go, but never hitting rock. At some point, you have to accept there is no rock. There's just process, just activity, just things happening. The universe isn't made of stuff, it's made of happening. Matter isn't substance sitting in empty space. Matter is space doing something, a different configuration of the same fields that make up the vacuum. You and the empty space next to you are made of the same thing, the same field, the same quantum foundation. You're just arranged differently. You're a pattern that persists, a ripple that keeps going, a fluctuation that got complicated enough to wonder what it's made of. And here's something else. Those fields connect everything. The electromagnetic field in your body is the same field as the electromagnetic field in a star 10 billion light years away. Same field, not a copy, not a similar field. The same continuous field extending through all of space. Particles are just places where that universal field does something interesting. Between those places, the field continues, quieter but present. You're not separate from the universe. You can't be. You're a localized pattern in fields that have no edges, that extend everywhere, that connect everything to everything else. So, back to our question. What's between the atoms? Field. Real physical fields that carry energy and exert forces. Virtual particles bubbling up from the quantum vacuum. Activity that never stops. Fluctuation that never rests. Potential that fills every point in space. Not nothing, never nothing. The space between atoms is the same stuff as the atoms themselves, just in a quieter state. When you reach out and touch something, you don't cross empty distance. You push through fields. Your fields interact with other fields. Electromagnetic repulsion creates the sensation of contact. But there's no emptiness to cross. It's fields all the way. The solid world you think you live in, the empty space you think surrounds it, these are both the same thing. Both are fields. The difference is just intensity, just pattern, just how much activity is happening where. And when you finally get this, when it really sinks in, reality looks different. The world stops being solid objects in empty space. It starts being what it actually is, a web of interacting fields, patterns emerging and dissolving, activity that never stops, no hard edges anywhere, no true emptiness anywhere, everything connected to everything by the very medium it's made of. You're made of that, a brief, complicated ripple in fields that were here before you and will be here after. The space inside you and the space between galaxies is the same space, made of the same fields, doing the same things. The only difference is the pattern. That's the answer. That's what's between the atoms. Not nothing, something. Something that turns out to be the same something that atoms themselves are made of. There is no between, really. There's just field everywhere in various states of excitation, and what we call matter is just the excited parts. So, can you imagine nothing now? True nothing? Absolute emptiness? You can't, and now you know why. Because nothing doesn't exist. Never did. The universe is incapable of emptiness. Even the quietest, most remote, most vacant corner of space churns with activity, buzzes with potential, refuses to be still. Reality isn't stuff and void. Reality is field. The field is everywhere, and everywhere, always, something is happening. That's what's between the atoms. That's what's between everything. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The solid world dissolves into shimmering activity, and emptiness reveals itself as the busiest place of all.
You could spend 12 hours in the library with a neon yellow highlighter, painting the entire book like it's a coloring book, and I guarantee you, congratulations, you just spent 12 hours doing absolutely nothing but coloring. What separates the genius from the parrot isn't how much they read, nor the magical technique they use to highlight words. The difference lies in what happens inside the black box, right there in the spongy tissue of your brain. Most of you study as if you were stacking bricks in a vacant lot. You pick up a fact, throw it there. Pick up a formula, throw it there. And you expect that magically a house will appear. It's not going to happen. Real learning is architecture, not accumulation. Deep processing is any type of thinking that leads you to form a schema of knowledge, an interconnected network. Think of your memory like a spider web. If you throw a piece of information at it and it doesn't stick to anything, if it stays isolated, floating in a vacuum, guess what your brain does? It throws it out. The brain is absurdly efficient at forgetting what isn't connected. It says, "This is useless. Bye." That's why you read a page and by the time you get to the bottom, you've already forgotten the top. You did shallow processing. You focused on memorizing, on repeating, on knowing the name. That is isolated learning. The secret to learning faster than everyone else is to force integrated learning. You don't just want to understand the concept, you want to know where it lives, who its neighbors are, and how it compares to the concept down the street. When you try to explain something complex simply, the essence of my favorite technique, you are forcing your brain to do this deep processing. You are creating analogies, comparing and contrasting. So electricity flows like water in a pipe. Bingo! The moment you make that connection, you stopped memorizing and started understanding. You integrated the information into your web, and once it's stuck in the web, connected to other things you already know, the brain protects it like gold. People who do this naturally are the ones you call geniuses or talented, the ones who get high grades without studying as much. But the good news, thanks to neuroplasticity, is that you can train this. It's not genetics, it's habit. So, from now on, I want you to install a radar in your head, an intellectual lie detector. Ask yourself every 5 minutes, is my learning right now isolated or integrated? If you are just trying to memorize the definition, stop. You are digging a hole in water. Change your approach. Ask, how does this look like something I already know? Why is this different from that? Force the connection. Is it uncomfortable? Is it hard? Great! The discomfort is the sound of your neurons lifting weights. If it were easy, you wouldn't be learning. You'd just be strolling. But be careful. Even with deep processing, you can get lost if you don't have a control mechanism, a steering wheel to guide this mental Ferrari. And that is exactly where most people spin out on the curve. Pay attention to me now, because what I'm about to say might sound like an insult at first glance, but it is the key that unlocks the universe of knowledge. Most of you are doing it wrong. You look at a book, at a formula, at a complex concept, and you think that knowing the name of something is the same as knowing something. It's not. I can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when I'm done, I'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. I'll only know about the humans who named it. To learn for real, to learn fast, to learn in a way that sticks to your mind like gum on a shoe, requires something more. It requires brutal honesty. It requires you to stop kidding yourself. And the best way to stop kidding yourself is to try to teach what you think you know to someone who knows nothing, or better yet, to a 5-year-old. If you can't explain it simply, you didn't understand it. Period. Now, imagine with me something that will change the way you face every book, every class, every new intellectual challenge. Imagine there is a secret, not magic, but a method, a sort of algorithm for the brain that allows you to devour information and transform it into deep understanding, not just cheap memorization. This method, my friends, starts with a fundamental shift in your head. The first step isn't opening the book, it's opening the mind. I'm talking about mindset. You see confusion as the enemy. You look at a difficult problem, feel that knot in your stomach, that feeling of, I'm too dumb for this, and you run. Wrong. Confusion is the signal. It is the pain of intellectual growth. If you aren't confused, you aren't learning. You're just reviewing what you already know. People with a fixed mindset look at a mistake and see failure. People who learn fast, who really understand the gears of the world, look at a mistake and see data. They see information. So it's not this way. Interesting. It is this curiosity in the face of error that accelerates learning by 20 times. Yes, 20 times. I'm not the one saying it, the data is. So, the first thing you need to do to master this technique, to learn faster than everyone else, is to embrace the initial stupidity. Accept that you are going to feel like an idiot at the beginning. And guess what? It's wonderful, because that is the moment the magic happens. It's when your brain starts making new connections, neuroplasticity kicks in, breaking and remaking paths. But you have to want this. You have to be willing to look foolish to become a genius. If you are afraid of making mistakes, you've already lost before you started. Learning to learn is absurdly important and absurdly complicated, but it starts with this simple permission, the permission to be wrong. Now, it's no use having the right mindset if you can't even get your butt in the chair. And here we enter the second dimension, something many of you ignore because you think it's stuff for clean freaks, but it's pure physics, self-management. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you think you're going to understand quantum mechanics in 30-second bursts, I have bad news. You won't. Deep learning requires a protected environment. It requires you to manage your focus as if it were the scarcest resource on the planet, because it is. You need to identify the chain of events that leads to your distraction. You pick up your phone to check the time, see a notification, click it, and poof, an hour is gone. You need to cut this at the root. Isolate the behavior, remove the temptation, create a space where deep study can actually happen. Without this, the technique I'm going to teach you is nothing more than a nice theoretical idea. You need uninterrupted time and attention to truly process the information. And process is the key word here. It's not about reading. Reading is easy. Anyone can read. It's about what your brain does with what you read. And that is where the majority fails miserably. Forget everything you think you know about studying. Seriously, throw it out. Most of you treat the brain like it's a supermarket shopping basket. You walk down the information aisles, grab a fact here, a formula there, throw it all in the basket, and think that when you get to the checkout counter, you've magically become intelligent. Let me tell you a secret. When you get to the checkout counter, the basket has a hole in it. You lost everything on the way. This is what we call shallow processing. You read the words, your eyes moved from left to right, but your brain was in standby mode. Real learning, the kind that sticks, the kind that allows you to solve problems you've never seen before, happens in a different dimension. We call this deep processing, but the fancy name gets in the way. Let's call it what it really is: the art of not letting information die of loneliness. Understand one thing about your gray matter: it hates orphaned information. If you learn an isolated fact, let's say the definition of mitochondria, and you don't connect it to anything, your brain looks at it and says, "This connects to nothing I already know, therefore it's trash." And poof, it disappears in less than a minute. Deep processing is the deliberate act of stitching new information into the fabric of what you already know. It's not about memorizing, it's about integrating. Imagine that your knowledge is a giant spider web. The amateur student tries to glue a speck of dust in the air. with no thread attached. The genius pulls a thread from the existing web and ties it to the new information. He asks, how is this similar to what I saw yesterday? How is this different from what I expected? If this is true, what else must be true? Do you want to know if you are really learning or just wasting time? Turn on your radar for isolated versus integrated. If you are reading and thinking, okay, got the definition, next, you are in isolated mode. You are digging your own intellectual grave. Integrated mode is loud. It's chaotic. You stop and think, wait, this works exactly like the water pressure in the pipes at my house. In that moment, when you create an analogy, when you translate the complex into the simple, you created a physical hook in your brain. You transformed a loose piece of data into a robust knowledge schema. That's why I always say, if you can't explain it to your grandmother, you didn't understand it, because explaining requires you to connect the new idea to concepts she already has. But I'm going to be honest with you. This hurts. Deep processing is uncomfortable. It's exhausting. Your brain is going to want to go back to the comfort of just highlighting the text and passively rereading. Resisting that comfort is what separates the curious from the mediocre. You are building mental muscles, and there is no hypertrophy without sweat. Now, you can have the right mindset, the perfect environment, and be willing to process deeply. But how do you guarantee you aren't kidding yourself along the way? How do you know if your brilliant analogy isn't actually complete nonsense? You need a real-time quality control system. You need to be the manager of your own mental factory. And this is where most people smash their faces against the wall, because the fourth dimension is missing. You are there, sweating bullets, trying to connect the dots, creating analogies, forcing your brain out of its comfort zone. Great, but who is in command? Who is checking if you aren't just running in circles with great intensity? Most of you study like a broken robot that hits a wall, backs up, and hits the same wall again, only harder, hoping the wall will move. That's not persistence, it's insanity. To learn faster than anyone else, you need to develop a dual personality. You need to be the student who is learning and at the same time the cruel scientist observing that student with a clipboard in hand. We enter the fourth dimension, self-regulation. It is the ability to monitor your own thinking in real time and, most importantly, have the courage to change course when the ship is sinking. Most people have a primitive adjustment strategy. Oh, I did poorly on the test? I'll study more hours. Wrong. More hours doing the wrong thing just creates a more consolidated mistake. Self-regulation requires a constant three-step cycle: cue, monitoring, and adjusting. You are reading a complex text. Suddenly, your eyes pass over 3 paragraphs and you absorbed nothing. That is the cue. The mediocre student ignores the cue and keeps reading, praying for a miracle. The elite student monitors. Whoops, my brain turned off. Passive mode took over. And then he makes the adjustment. He doesn't keep reading. He stops. He changes the technique. Reading isn't working. I'm going to draw a diagram. I'm going to try to explain it out loud to the wall. I'm going to ask the book a question. He changes tactics until deep processing starts happening again. But here is the deadly trap where most of you will fall. And I need you to pay double attention now. There is a treacherous phenomenon called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. When you start self-regulating, when you realize your passive reading is garbage and decide to switch to an active technique, like trying to explain the concept without looking, my favorite, do you know what will happen? It's going to seem harder. It's going to seem like you're learning less because you're struggling more. And your brain, lazy as it is, will scream, "Hey, this is too hard. It must be wrong. Let's go back to highlighting text. That felt nicer." If you listen to that voice, you've lost. The difficulty isn't a sign that you are failing. It is physical proof that you are learning. If you change your technique and feel like your brain is frying, congratulations, you just found the way. Don't retreat to comfort. Self-regulation is the discipline of feeling the discomfort of inefficiency, adjusting to a harder technique, and enduring the pain of growth.
You need to be ruthless with your own methods. Don't fall in love with the way you study. Fall in love with understanding. If a tool doesn't work, throw it out and grab another. Test, fail, adjust, repeat. If you do this, you stop being a passive passenger in your education and become the pilot. But even if you have the mindset, the focus, the deep processing, and the self-regulation, there is a final villain, a silent thief that steals everything you've achieved while you sleep. You can understand everything today, be an absolute genius at 10 p.m., and wake up tomorrow a complete ignoramus. And it's not your fault, it's biology. But there is a way to hack this too.
The villain I mentioned? His name is decay. It is the law of entropy applied to your memory. You built that beautiful house of cards of knowledge last night, and this morning, the wind blew and half of it fell. This is biological. It is inevitable. As soon as you learn something, that information begins to fade. Your brain is a machine of efficiency. It doesn't want to waste energy maintaining neural connections for information you don't use. So it cleans house. And if you do nothing, you are going to spend your whole life filling a leaky bucket, learning and forgetting, in an eternal cycle of mediocrity. How do we stop this bleeding? We enter the fifth and final dimension, the one that guarantees knowledge stays, retrieval. And please, for the love of physics, do not confuse this with reviewing. Reviewing, for most of you, is scanning your colorful notes and saying, "Oh yeah, I remember this." Lie. You don't remember. You just recognize. Recognizing is passive and easy. Retrieving is active and painful. Retrieving is closing the book, looking at the ceiling, ignoring your notes, and forcing your brain to reconstruct the concept from scratch. It is dragging the information out of long-term memory. It is the difference between looking at the answer to a math equation and thinking you understood it, versus having a blank sheet in front of you and having to solve the equation yourself. The secret here is timing. If you try to retrieve 5 seconds after reading, it's too easy. It doesn't count. You need to let the forgetting start to act. You need to let the rust set in a little. This is what we call spaced retrieval. You learn today, try to remember tomorrow. It's going to be hard. You will stutter. But when you manage to pull that information back from the depths, you send a powerful chemical signal to your brain. Hey, stop! Don't throw this away. I need this. You reset the forgetting curve, and every time you do this, the memory decays more slowly. You are literally refilling the memory before it empties. But there is a final trap for those who think they are clever. Don't be a flashcard robot. Many of you fall into the error of practicing retrieval in an isolated way. You memorize definitions like parrots. What is the mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell. Great. You memorize the phrase. But if I give you a complex biology problem where cellular energy is the key, you freeze. Why? Because you practiced isolated retrieval, not integrated retrieval. The golden rule is practice how you play. If in the real world or on your exam you need to solve problems, it's useless to practice reciting definitions. You need to retrieve knowledge by applying it. Mix up the subjects. Use interleaving. Attack the problem from different angles. Force your brain to not just remember what it is, but where and how to use it. Now you have the complete map. You have the 5 keys. But having the treasure map doesn't make you rich if you don't start digging. And most of you, unfortunately, love collecting maps and hate picking up the shovel. Mindset to accept the mistake. Self-management to create the space. Deep processing to weave the web. Self-regulation to pilot the process. And retrieval to beat time. But let me tell you one last inconvenient truth, perhaps the most important of all. Knowing how the engine works doesn't make the car go. You can watch this video 100 times. You can tattoo deep processing on your forehead. But if you don't close this tab right now and go there, in the silence, to fight against the confusion and the urge to give up, nothing will change. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Do not confuse the familiarity of watching a video with real understanding. Nature cannot be fooled. Your brain cannot be cheated. Either you build the connections or you have nothing. If you made it this far, if you endured the complexity and are willing to embrace the discomfort, you are already part of an absolute minority. Prove it now. I want you to make a brutal diagnosis of yourself right here and now. Which of these 5 dimensions is your anchor? What is your speed limiter? Is it the fragile mindset? Is it the lack of focus? Is it shallow studying? Comment below with the exact phrase, "My limiter is," and complete it with the dimension you are going to destroy starting today. Make it public. Commit to it. Most people will close this video and go back to the comfort of the shallow, of the illusion of competence. They will continue studying a lot and learning little, frustrated, blaming a lack of talent, but not you. Now you know that talent is a lie. What exists is the method. You have the choice to step out of the cave. Learning to learn is the superpower that makes all other superpowers possible. If you master this, there is no book too hard. There is no concept too complex. The whole world opens up for you to play. And if this spark lit something inside you, if you felt that tingle of curiosity you haven't felt in a long time, smash the like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a signal to yourself that you value depth in a world addicted to superficiality. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring the universe of knowledge without training wheel. Class is dismissed. Now, the real work. Imagine for a moment that genius isn't a type of person, but a way of thinking. Many people believe they were born with a brain bad at learning, as if the mind came with a permanent factory label. But that's just the snapshot of a brain that got used to working in only one way, usually a lazy, automatic way, untrained for deep thinking. The good news? The brain is plastic, highly plastic, a living muscle that reorganizes itself when we demand more from it. Neuroplasticity, that elegant word that sounds like it came from a futuristic lab, basically says, if you train me, I change. It doesn't matter your age, academic history, or how many traumatic report cards you have from the past. The mind learns to learn, and that means intelligence, focus, and depth aren't destiny, they're practice. But here's a detail almost no one tells you. Reprogramming the way you think takes time, months, maybe years. But the difference is, when it changes, it really changes. And that's what transforms someone ordinary into the type of person who understands quickly, connects ideas, solves problems, and learns without suffering. To start, we need to answer, what exactly makes someone seem like a genius? Usually, 2 things stand out. Off-the-charts memory. It's not magic. It's the result of how information was encoded the first time. A bad memory almost always comes from a bad first contact. Deep understanding. The ability to take an idea and work with it like it's clay, twist it, compare it, test it, apply it, transform it. The combination of these 2 factors creates the myth of the genius. But behind the myth, there's only method, and method can be learned. Now get ready, because we're going to dive into the internal engineering of this so-called deep understanding and reveal why most people don't think, they just repeat. Most people believe they've understood something simply because they recognized the words. But recognizing isn't understanding. It's just familiarity disguised as intelligence. The brain loves this trick. It shows you information. You think, oh, I know this, and boom. The mind closes the book before even really opening it. It's like seeing the cover of an airplane manual and thinking you can already fly. This kind of superficial thinking creates an illusion of knowledge that, deep down, prevents real learning. Deep understanding is born when you force your mind to explain, not just repeat. This is where the game changes. Explaining is dismantling an idea and reassembling it with your own pieces. It's transforming information into structure. When you explain something in your own words, the mind is forced to use real cognitive energy, and this activates the neural networks that consolidate memory, reasoning, and clarity. It's like switching from a weak flashlight to a spotlight. You see angles that weren't visible before. But there's another extremely dangerous cognitive trap: automatic thinking. The brain loves shortcuts because they save energy. But mental shortcuts are like trying to learn math using only magic tricks. They seem to work for a while until you encounter a real problem and everything collapses. Thinking deeply requires effort and slowing down. It's the moment when you tell your brain, hold on, Let's understand this properly, and that's when the miracle begins. But effort alone isn't enough. You need to ask the right question, the question that activates insight, the question that forces your brain to leave the surface. And that question is simple. Why is this true? This has been found repeatedly in studies on learning and appears as a critical mechanism for converting curiosity into solid understanding. When you ask why, your mind is pushed into the internal engineering of the idea. It's like opening the box and looking at the engine inside. You separate cause and effect, understand relationships, identify what matters, and discard what doesn't. It's a type of thinking that transforms an average student into someone capable of creating, improvising, and innovating. Another powerful practice is testing whether you really understood something by trying to apply it in a different context. If the idea only works in the original example, you memorized, you didn't learn. But if you can move the concept to another scenario, twist it a bit, adapt it, play with it, then your mind starts operating in genius mode. And here comes an important, almost amusing detail. The brain doesn't like to think deeply, but it loves the feeling of having understood something deeply. It's like climbing a mountain, tiring during, satisfying after. The difference is that when you really think, this after transforms everything. Memory improves, focus improves, reasoning improves, even your confidence changes. Now that you understand the danger of automatic thinking and the power of explaining, asking, and applying, let's move to the next layer: how to transform curiosity into a permanent learning engine. Curiosity isn't just a pleasant feeling, it's a biological force, a survival mechanism that pushes the brain to solve mysteries. But there's a secret here. Curiosity doesn't arise from what you already know, but from what you almost know. The mind gets hooked when it perceives a small gap, something within your reach but still outside your domain. It's the famous, "I almost got it." This gray zone is the spark that transforms interest into deep attention. And here's the crucial point. You can create this spark deliberately. How? By asking questions that create cognitive tension. Not anxiety, but that slight discomfort that makes the brain want to complete a pattern. Questions like, what am I missing? Which part of this still doesn't make sense? Or, if this were false, why would it be? Push your mind into an activity it normally avoids. Real investigation. When you investigate, the brain lights up areas connected to motivation, memory, and reward, and learning accelerates. But there's something even more interesting. Curiosity multiplies when you transform knowledge into a mental game. For example, trying to predict the next part of a concept before reading it, or trying to answer a question before seeing the answer. Neuroscience shows that when you try to guess something, even if you're wrong, your brain activates learning areas much more strongly than when you just receive information ready-made. Mistakes, in fact, are fuel for sophisticated learning. They create contrast, and contrast creates clarity. Another essential aspect is allowing yourself to play with ideas. Many people think serious reasoning requires rigidity, but the greatest insights come when you allow your mind to make unlikely connections. Playing intellectually is an elegant way of telling the brain, look for new patterns, and when it looks, it finds. But this play has one rule. You need to feel free to make mistakes. Without this freedom, the brain becomes defensive, rigid, trying to seem right instead of trying to understand. And here's the key that transforms curiosity into permanent skill. You must learn to fall in love with the question, not the answer. Answers are static. Questions are expansive. When you cultivate good questions, you create an internal engine that keeps running even after the video, class, or conversation ends. This is how genius minds operate. They don't accumulate answers. They manufacture irresistible questions. Now that you understand how to activate curiosity and convert it into real learning, we're ready to enter the region where genius really begins. The brain doesn't learn in large blocks. It learns in strategic fragments. The human mind wasn't made to absorb large blocks of information at once. It was made to break the world into small, manageable, meaningful pieces. When you try to learn something huge all at once, your brain goes into protection mode. It freezes, disperses, pushes everything away. But when you present content in smart fragments, almost like puzzle pieces, the brain does exactly the opposite. It approaches, organizes, and connects. Imagine this. Each piece of information is like a knot. The brain doesn't want to keep loose knots. It wants to tie them to each other to form a network. The more connections, the stronger the learning. That's why a powerful secret for training your mind like a brilliant mind is to fragment ideas until they become inevitable. When something is inevitable, the brain doesn't fight, it accepts.
This is where an elegant technique comes in, the micro-block method. Instead of studying for 1 hour, you study for 5 minutes, but 5 minutes with intensity, clarity, and absolute focus on just one point. In this micro-block, you ask yourself, what's the essence? And what does this really mean? 5 well-used minutes are worth more than 50 poorly distributed minutes. The brain learns in focus, not in brute effort. Another essential principle is repetition with variation. Repeating exactly the same is boring for the brain, and everything boring gets erased. But when you repeat an idea by slightly changing the context, the brain registers it as something alive, relevant, applicable. That's why great masters explain the same thing in multiple ways. They don't repeat because they forgot. They repeat because they want you to remember. And here's a powerful image. Learning is like illuminating a dark room with a flashlight. With each small sweep of light, you see more details. You don't turn on all the lights at once. You explore. Genius is in the movement, not in the volume. Finally, there's a serious mistake that prevents thousands of people from learning well. They try to memorize before understanding. It's like trying to build walls without a foundation. When you understand, memory forms naturally. When you memorize, it evaporates. The right fragment, repeated the right way, with active curiosity, creates a mind that doesn't just learn, but transforms what it learns into powerful clarity. And now we're ready to explore something deep. How to transform this knowledge into real reasoning. The kind of thinking that solves problems, creates ideas, and sees patterns invisible to most. Reasoning well isn't thinking more, it's thinking better. Most people think intelligence is a brute force of the mind, a kind of hidden muscle. But truly powerful thinking doesn't come from effort, it comes from internal organization. A trained mind doesn't desperately chase answers, it creates pathways. Imagine that each problem is a closed box. The common mind tries to break open the box. The brilliant mind first tries to understand the shape of the lock. It doesn't waste energy, it directs energy. And reasoning is that, direction. One of the most elegant principles for training this kind of thinking is the mother question technique. Every complex question can be reduced to a simple question that organizes the chaos. You ask questions like, what's really happening here? What's the essential part of this? What do I need to ignore to understand? The mind gains clarity not when it adds more information, but when it removes noise. Another fundamental point, you only truly understand something when you can explain it with simple words. Not simple because you're limited, simple because you're deep. Complication is a disguise for confusion. Simplicity is the mark of comprehension. When your brain translates an idea to its most essential form, it's as if it's drawing an internal map, and a clear map is always more useful than a foggy landscape. Here's a powerful analogy. Thinking is like tuning an instrument. If you tune string by string, sound by sound, the music flows. If you try to play with everything out of tune, it becomes noise. So whenever your mind gets stuck, stop and tune a single string. Redefine focus. Formulate a central question. Eliminate an irrelevant detail. A tuned mind produces insights with little effort, almost as if it's hearing the answer instead of manufacturing it. And there's still a secret that few understand. Thinking is a physical art. Ideas only align when you get them out of your head. Speak out loud. Draw, write scribbles, trace arrows. The mind is brilliant, but it's a terrible place to store loose thoughts. When you externalize, the brain frees up space and starts to see invisible relationships. Insight comes because you gave it space to be born. When you master this way of thinking, something powerful happens. Problems stop being monsters and become mechanisms. And when you understand the mechanism, you control the outcome. Now that you master clarity, let's advance to an even more sophisticated point. How to transform knowledge and reasoning into real creativity. that rare ability to see solutions where no one else is looking. Creativity isn't a magical talent reserved for geniuses. It's a specific way of combining information. The common mind looks for answers within the obvious. The creative mind takes pieces no one imagined together and builds something new. And when you learn this process, your mind starts producing ideas like breathing. The first key to creativity is accepting a simple fact. Your mind hates empty, so it fills spaces. If you create the right space, it fills with solutions. But if you live squeezed by anxiety, haste, and excess stimulation, it only fills with noise. Creativity is silence where a flash is. That's why moments of pause, shower, walk, coffee, looking out the window are hidden laboratories of the brain. While you think you're not thinking, your mind is connecting wires that were previously separate. But it's not enough to wait for the flash. Creative insight is an active process, almost engineering. First you collect pieces, then you dismantle, then you recombine. A simple and powerful way to do this is to ask, what if I do the opposite? What if this works without this part? What element can I steal from another area and put here? The world's most creative minds don't invent from scratch. They transplant ideas. And here comes one of the most elegant techniques for training the mind like a genius: cognitive contrast. When you compare two distant ideas, physics and cooking, music and math, art and engineering, your mind creates bridges. And it's on these bridges that unique solutions are born. The more varied your repertoire, the more powerful your capacity for invention. A narrow mind creates little. A broad mind creates world. There's also an essential detail that almost no one understands. Creativity requires courage. Yes, courage, because every new idea seems silly before it seems brilliant. And whoever fears embarrassment never accesses their true creative potential. Fear blocks the flow. Curiosity releases it. The creative mind is the mind that allows itself to fail fast, test fast, adjust fast. Creating is playing with the unknown until it becomes familiar. And the most beautiful point of all, creativity isn't about being different. It's about being perceptibly useful. A genius idea isn't the most exotic. It's the one that solves something elegantly. Creativity is functional aesthetics. It's when the solution is so good it seems simple. But it only seems that way because you did the hard work of really thinking. Now that you master reasoning and creativity, let's enter the territory that separates common minds from extraordinary minds. How to transform knowledge, clarity, and creativity into real skill. The ability to learn anything quickly. Learning fast isn't a gift, it's method. And the method starts with a simple question that almost no one has the courage to ask. What exactly didn't I understand? It seems obvious, but observe. Most people fake comprehension to protect the ego, when precisely the act of admitting failure is what opens space for real understanding. The mind that learns isn't the one that seems intelligent, but the one that allows itself to investigate without shame. Accelerated learning works like assembling a puzzle. You don't need all the pieces to see the image, just the right pieces. That's why the trick is to locate the key points, the invisible structures that support everything else. When you understand the mechanism behind the phenomenon, you learn 10 times faster. It's like discovering the magician's trick. After you see it, you never unsee it. And here's a detail that changes everything. Asking is smarter than answering. Each well-made question stretches the brain, forces clarity, and reveals shortcuts. So think now, really think. What subject in your life haven't you mastered yet because you never asked the right question about it? Hold that reflection for a moment.
The ability to learn also depends on the skill of breaking complex subjects into smaller, chewable blocks. The most common mistake is trying to understand everything at once and drowning the brain. Don't do that. Instead ask, what's the smallest part of this I can understand now? And then build on top. A brilliant mind doesn't run, it stacks. But none of this works if you don't apply the maximum rule of learning. Teach to understand. When you explain something in your own words, the brain is forced to organize the idea, detect holes, correct flaws. Each explanation is a workout. Each explanation makes you sharper. The more you teach, the more you learn, even if no one's listening. Now, I want you to do something for yourself. What skill have you been postponing learning because it seems too difficult? Write it in the comments. Yes, write it. I read all of them, absolutely all of them. And if you leave your difficulty there, I can help you dismantle that skill into simple, clear steps that finally make sense. Because the truth is this: the distance between you and your next great competency isn't talent, it's method, and you're learning the method. By this point, you've realized an exceptional mind isn't born ready. It's built, piece by piece, decision by decision. And the most interesting thing is that after you change the way you think, the world starts to change with it. Not because it got easier, but because you got clearer, sharper, more capable. The brain loves whoever challenges it with kindness, loves when you ask better questions, loves when you break big problems into small parts, loves when you explain something out loud as if illuminating your own darkness. That's the real training. That's the secret that separates those who want to learn from those who actually learn. And if you got this far, that already says something powerful about you. Your mind wants to grow. And when a mind wants to grow, nothing holds it back. Now I want to make you a direct invitation. What was the biggest insight you had today? Write it in the comments. I read all of them, and I respond whenever I can. Sometimes a single sentence from you gives me the chance to guide you on the right path. If this video helped you, provoked you, or made you think, then do this now. Like the video, because this takes this message to other people who need it as much as you do. And if you want to continue training your mind with me, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, each video is designed to expand your thinking, accelerate your learning, and bring you closer to your best version. Not the perfect version, but the possible version, built day after day. Thank you for being here. Now go out there and use your mind, not as a spectator, but as the author of your own thinking. See you in the next video. The secret isn't forcing memorization, it's lighting a child's curiosity. Every word you say, every gesture, every how you offer can repair or build a bridge in their brain. Curiosity isn't a small detail of genius, it's the root. It's where big ideas, world-changing projects, and human progress begin. Learning quickly and easily almost always connects to genuine interest. A person who's obsessed and takes pleasure in what they do learns far faster than someone who sees no point in it. Here's the key. To turn a child into someone who learns for pleasure, not obligation, follow 3 simple principles. Simplify any topic, make learning fun, and listen with the same intensity with which you teach. The method I'm proposing follows that path exactly. First, choose an image or an object that tells a story. Second, describe that story in very simple language, the way you'd speak to a 7-year-old. Third, ask the child to explain it back in their own words, without fear, without immediate correction. Here's the power. When a child tries to explain, they organize their thinking, reveal gaps, and form links between what they see and what they feel. When you correct, don't say, "That's wrong." Correct with a new example, a mini experiment, or a concrete gesture. And always celebrate the attempt, not just the right answer. That builds courage. Without courage, there is no deep learning. Now let's put this into practice. Imagine teaching fractions with cookies. Take 6 cookies, or pieces of paper, place them in front of the child and say, "Let's divide a treasure." Ask them to make 2 equal piles. Watch. If they hesitate, ask, "How do you know they're equal?" Let them explain. If their explanation fails, don't give the answer. Show 2 piles and ask them to swap 1 cookie between the piles so they can feel the difference. Then ask them to tell the story of what happened in their own words. When they say, "One got bigger," turn the phrasing back to their perspective. Yes, when we swapped a cookie, that pile got bigger. Why do you think that happened? That pushes argumentation and language. For new vocabulary, use the same tactic. Image plus phrase in the child's native language plus acting it out. Then ask them to teach it to you. At first it's translation, then independence follows. She'll start thinking in the new word without translating. Create micro-routines of 10 to 20 minutes that always end with the child saying,
Teach me. For example, 10 minutes of picture reading, 5 minutes to draw the story, and 5 minutes to explain it to you, without looking at the book. In each session, ask only 2 key questions. What did you understand? And how would you explain this to John? Using a friend's name forces simplicity. Use role play. Turn the child into the teacher for 3 minutes. Give them an imaginary blackboard, ask them to explain, then follow up with genuine curiosity. That simple game builds autonomy and creates a repetition rhythm that locks the mental structure in place without boredom. Never underestimate the power of tone. The words you use when you correct shape a child's identity. Instead of, "You're wrong," try, "Interesting. Tell me again how you got to that." Swap wrong for not yet. Small phrases make huge emotional repairs. The same goes for praise. Instead of, "Good job," say, "I see you tried X and noticed Y." That shows your brain is connecting ideas. That teaches process, not outcome. When a child says, "This is hard," turn it into an operation. Which part is hard? Pick one word: confused, long, boring. And let's sketch a single step to fix that. You're teaching metacognition, thinking about thinking. Metacognition is what separates repeaters from masters. Bring movement and multisensory experience in. Walk around while you explain. Draw in the air with your finger. Use objects. Do short dramatizations. The body helps the brain lock in abstract logic. For math, build stories with characters. For science, run tiny experiments. A cup of water, a balloon, a shadow. For reading, turn pages into maps. Where are we in the story? Draw the character's map. Use songs and rhymes for grammar and vocabulary. Keep the element of surprise. Change rules, swap roles, offer symbolic rewards, a teacher for 5 minutes certificate. Curiosity is the engine. Your job is to keep it burning with small, manageable failures that provoke questions, not with pre-cooked answers. Think long-term. Transformative education isn't a magic trick. It's a habit of connection. Listen to the questions children ask and answer with another question that forces them to build meaning. If a child asks why 3 times in a row, you have a goldmine. Let them lead the experiment. Take notes, drawings, marks, and at the end, ask them to summarize in one simple sentence. Track progress with a wall of small wins. Not cold grades, but entries like, "Today I explained why the moon looks bigger." Those records become emotional fuel. The child sees their trail of progress and wants to keep going. And you, as the teacher, must be vigilant. Every word you say is liquid that molds beliefs. Finally, be radically present. Teaching well requires listening, eye to eye, distraction-free, with questions that provoke thinking. When the child explains, don't finish their sentences. Wait through the silence. That's where the brain knits connections. When they fail, turn the mistake into a stage for inquiry. Interesting. Shall we test hypothesis X? Be a partner in discovery, not a judge. Remember, there are incredible ways to teach that turn disinterest into passion. The Feynman technique applied to a child is simple. Choose what to teach, simplify it, ask the child to teach it back, identify where they stumble, and repeat with a new example. If you do this every day with joy and attention, there's a real chance they'll become interested in anything. Start today. Take their hand, point at an object, and say, "Teach me this." You might be opening the door to an extraordinary future. When a child says, "I don't want to," pause for a second and treat it as a clue, not a challenge. Say in a calm, curious voice, "I hear you. Tell me why you don't want to do this right now." Validating isn't giving in. It opens the door to conversation. Resistance is almost always fear, tiredness, or the feeling that the task is impossible. Instead of pushing, offer a reduction. Just 2 minutes. Then you decide. The 2-minute rule works like magic. It lowers the barrier and creates a real chance for engagement. If they say, "It's boring," don't argue. Make a practical change. Offer 2 controlled options. Do you want to draw this
or teach it to someone. And always pick the option that preserves learning. Autonomy reduces resistance. Another immediate tactic: turn the activity into a quick experiment. Let's just test this like scientists. Make a hypothesis in 30 seconds. Kids love testing hypotheses. Being a scientist becomes a game. In daily practice, have go-to phrases at the ready. If a child says, "I don't want to," respond, "Okay, tell me which part bothers you." If they say it's hard, ask, "Which little part is hard? The words, the idea, or the drawing?" If a parent questions you, say, "I understand. Want to see a 5-minute demo now?" These short phrases steer the conversation toward action, not debate. Use micro-rewards and social roles. Offer a sticker for effort, or turn the learner into the teacher for 3 minutes. Often the child who resists just wants to prove they can. Giving them the teacher role activates pride and reduces pushback. If resistance persists, break the task into 30 to 60-second steps and celebrate the smallest effort. You started. That's already courage. Document quickly. Take a fast photo of the child explaining and ask for one sentence. "Today I taught," in 2 weeks. Show this material to parents or administration. Simple evidence defeats skepticism. Finally, memorize 3 lines that always work. Validation plus question. "I understand. Why do you prefer not to do this now?" Reduction plus choice. "Just 2 minutes. Or would you rather do it later?" You decide. Light challenge plus role. "Teach me just one part. If you don't like it, we stop." Never force a child to do something they don't want to do. Stop. Calmly ask, "Why don't you want to do this now?" And really listen. The answer is the clue to adapt the activity. Rather than impose, offer choices, shrink the task, and turn it into a game or role until interest emerges. That's how you teach with respect, effectiveness, and joy, and create learning that lasts. If you found this method useful, subscribe now so you don't miss the next videos. Here, practice beats theory. Leave a like if you found it helpful, and comment below what you'll try first. Write 1 line, or share a result. I read everything. Share this with a teacher, parent, or caregiver who needs it. Tag someone who will put it into practice. Hit the bell to get the next micro sessions and ready-made lesson scripts. Let's turn curiosity into habit. See you in the